accosted them. More like telling the riffraff to keep their eyeballs in their sockets. Just because I have the most gorgeous girlfriend doesn't mean they have the right to drool on the menu. Laughing, Genevieve reached up and kissed his cheek. They're just jealous. Obviously. Instead of heading down the stairs as she'd expected, Finn led her down the stone walkway that curved around the side of the Great Hall. The drop-off to the ground below was perhaps 6 or 7 feet, the ground sloping downward until it met the tree line. They rounded the bend and Genevieve perked at the sight of a door a short distance away, tucked into a back corner of the Great Hall. "I thought you'd like to see the library," Finn said. You do know how to treat a girl." Genevieve smirked as he opened the door and waved her inside. The library was a decent size, rows upon rows of shelves, and nearly pitch black with the slowly darkening skies outside the windows. The air smelled of leather and old parchment and the slight tang of ink. She scanned the tomes, touching the old bindings while Finn closed the door behind them. "Is anyone in here?" Genevieve asked. "I doubt it," Finn said, stopping at a nearby table. A snap broke the silence as he lit a match. She watched as he lit the candles on the surrounding tables. Their shadows stretched and bobbed across the shelves as they moved. "This is where Matilda works. You haven't met her yet. Librarian and my dad's record keeper." "Ah. And they don't guard this place?" "Oh, we don't keep the actual records here," Finn said, crossing his arms and leaning against a shelf. "My dad has them shipped off to the meatheads, or brawn if you will. Kara the Kind is the chief, right?" "Right. There's an island under her jurisdiction that's basically the center of records keeping. Treaty documents, genealogies, birth and death certificates for the royal clans. Real creepy place." Intrigued, Genevieve faced him, the large volume in her hand forgotten. "You've been there." She clumsily tried to replace the book and kept hitting the shelving unit with a thud. She frowned and slid the book beside its brothers, almost missing his nonchalant shrug. "Once, when I traveled with my dad for the chiefly meetings years ago. He wanted to swing by and take care of some things with the creepy old guy that lives there. Come to think of it, he just went there again last week for something." Finn shrugged again. "To be fair, I don't remember much. It was really dark and dusty and you couldn't talk in there or the ghost of the hairy scary librarian would come and get you. Or at least, that's what Olaf said." Shaking her head in confusion, Genevieve said, "Hairy scary librarian? I thought names like Yue the Yodeler and the lugubrious lava louts were bad." "Hey, I wasn't around when they named the tribes," Finn said, grinning. "And as for the hairy scary librarian, who knows what the real story was? Perhaps he was some old guy who loved books and never had a real friend in his sad, lonely life. So he locked himself up in the library until he died." "Finn, that's awful. Or, perhaps he's just some demented soul entrusted with the records of Viking kings long since passed." He smirked when she turned away with a shudder. "Don't breathe too loudly or he'll gesture." Genevieve rolled her eyes. "You're insufferable." And who was all she turned but he was gone. Finn. Standing in the suddenly silent library, Genevieve looked around, straining her ears for any sound. She hadn't heard him move, but he could certainly be quiet when he wanted to be. They were the only two in here though. He couldn't hide for long. Replacing the skinny book she'd been holding on the shelf, Genevieve stepped into the aisleway. The candles lit on the end tables burned steadily, the flames not guttering in the silence. She couldn't sense any movement. Despite herself, Genevieve felt her heartbeat speed up. But she resolved to keep her head, not panic. The dark wasn't her favorite place, but it wasn't a very large library. Two could play at this game. So she strode into the next aisle with a smirk of her own. Finn had to admit to himself, it was hard to stay silent as he crept through the aisles. She could be sneaky too when she wanted. He remembered the day she'd snuck into the arena on Jet to train Maximum. Her only problem today, whether she knew it or not, was that the rustling of her dress gave her away. He almost always knew where she was. Therefore, he was always able to keep some distance from her while she crept in and out of the aisles, trying for all the world to stay calm and not lose her head. She was adorable when she got like this. Like she was trying so hard to not let a situation take over and sway her emotions. She got this cute little crease on the bridge of her nose from frowning. He ducked behind the nearest shelf, wincing. She'd paused suddenly, clearly to listen. He bit down on his tongue hard and waited. Perhaps he'd gotten a little too overzealous. And when he peeked around the corner a moment later, she was gone. Crap. He was just about to step out to begin his search, try to catch up to her, when the nearest candle sputtered out. Doused in darkness, Finn froze, waiting for his eyes to adjust. It wouldn't do to knock into a shelf and send it sprawling. Or break his nose. Or knock over one of the other candles and set the library on fire. Or all of the above. Whatever the case, hopefully Genevieve was in a lighted area somewhere. Something tickled the nape of his neck and Finn whipped around, finding himself nose to nose with Genevieve. Boo! Finn recoiled on instinct and nearly collided with the shelf behind him, thankfully resting against the stone wall. Genevieve cackled and darted back into the darkness. Oh no you don't! Finn lunged after her. Genevieve yelped as he caught up faster than she could run in the dress and shot down another aisle. Finn didn't check his speed and very nearly careened into another shelf. He darted down the next aisle, throwing all caution and stealth to the wind. Her laughter was shrill and panicked from the thrill of being chased in the dark. He rounded the corner and they nearly collided, her scream of shock cut off when he grabbed her around the middle and lifted her off her feet. Gotcha! Finn laughed. See, what did I tell you? Her scary librarian. Oh no. Not fair. He nearly dropped her in his haste to get away from her probing fingers grabbing at his ribs. Does this make me the tickle monster then? Genevieve asked, even as he grabbed her arms and forced them away from his sides. She tried to twist out of his grip and Finn pushed her up against the nearest shelf. The hairy scary librarian and the tickle monster. We'd make a cute couple. Sharing breathing space, Finn shook his head slightly. We're already a cute couple. Ducking slightly, Finn found her mouth in the darkness. He briefly thought he should be careful, but at her sigh and the way she eagerly kissed him back, it quickly dissolved. Gods, the chaste kisses earlier were soft and gentle and sweet, reminding him of those quiet nights on Jet where they'd stayed up till the wee hours of the morning talking and getting to know each other. But in the months of writing letters, he'd forgotten what it felt like to well and truly kiss her. Not to mention the thrill in his chest when she kissed him back with just as much enthusiasm. Genevieve pulled her hands from his and they were soon on his neck, in his hair as she pulled him closer, opening for him. Her tongue brushed his and God's. He clutched her to him, savoring the feel of her curves under his hands, the sounds she made. It was a song to his blood, to his senses, and it only begged for more. Their lips separated for a moment and twisting the hair off her neck, he mouthed her jaw and neck. Finn, she moaned in his ear. On a whim he gently bit down on the soft space between her neck and shoulder and she squealed, very nearly yanking out the hair at his nape. He quickly kissed the spot and her neck, finding the hammering pulse at her throat. Her eyes glittered in the darkness, perhaps a bit shocked at his daring. You bit me. Did you like it? He asked, not wanting to do it again if she hadn't. She must have been at a loss for words because she nodded, her hands sliding to face. Panting, he found her lips again and tilted her jaw up so he could kiss her more fully. She yanked at his shirt until it became untucked, wasting no time at all in shoving her hand up his shirt against his too hot skin. Their lips separated loudly in the darkness and he felt her pulling at the buttons of his vest. Get off. Laughing at her impatience, Finn made quick work of it and shucked it off. A few bells began to peal in his head but he ignored them, yanking his white shirt over his head and tossing it aside. Gently pushing against his chest, she backed him up until his back was to another shelf, a candle sputtering on a table a few feet behind her. She looked, gods, she looked so beautiful it hurt. Her curly hair was bushier than usual from his hands, flakes of gold flickering in the strands from the candlelight. Her eyes were dark as midnight, her lips swollen as she bit them, gazing down at his chest, bare except for the Sullivan crest. Finn swallowed hard. Things were a lot easier to see when they weren't standing in a dark corner. But seeing the way she looked at him still sent a thrill through his chest. Genevieve licked her lips, her dark eyes flicking up to meet his. I've never done anything like this before. Not to this extent. Well, Finn said, still trying to catch his breath. We certainly don't have to do any more than you're comfortable with. Or you, she added, a small smile twisting her lips. She stepped closer, her hands sliding so slowly up his chest. Thoughts and feelings flashed through his mind and he fought to keep his breathing steady, and failing utterly when she stood on tiptoes and kissed him once, gently. Finn's eyes closed as her lips pulled away from his and then pressed to his jaw, his neck, the hollow of his throat. Oh gods! His head hit the back shelf with a soft thud as he tipped it backward, biting his lip against the groan as she kissed her way back up his neck, her nails scraping gently down his torso. He almost didn't hear her soft laugh, despite being so close to his ear. Do you like that? My hands and lips all over you. Gods, Finn felt hot all over, felt his control slipping by the second. She kissed him then, biting his lip in a tantalizing way and drawing back. Like a cat with a ball of string, he couldn't resist kissing her again and again and again, his blood thundering in his ears. His hands roamed her back, her hips freely. Genevieve moaned at the touch and gods, the sound of her, he wanted more of her, wanted everything. The thought sent lightning crackling through his brain. He lurched back, their lips separating loudly. Wait. Gods, too much, too fast. If he didn't calm down. What's wrong? Genevieve asked in breathless surprise, her hands still in his hair, on his skin. Shaking his head, trying to calm down, Finn gently pulled her hands away. We need to stop. His voice was so rough, he almost didn't recognize it. Genevieve looked slightly devastated when he stepped out of her reach. Finn. Hang on, just give me a minute. Finn crammed his palms into his eyes until he saw stars, taking slow, deep breaths, trying to cool the fire in his veins, the thundering of his heart. This wasn't right. Spending time with her, kissing her, it wasn't wrong. But getting so worked up that he was tempted to take more than he had the right, that wasn't okay. It made him no better than he was 3 years ago. He had no right to go that far with any girl, let alone Genevieve, who was sweet and kind and had been a hell of a lot purer before he came into her life. And Kiev. Gods, the man trusted him to take care of his daughter, to treat her right. Even if Genevieve wasn't complaining, that didn't make it right. It felt like a long few minutes before his heartbeat slowed enough that it didn't feel like it was about to pound out of his chest. Taking a deep breath, he rubbed his face and slowly lowered his hands. Genevieve was watching him with a concerned expression, her fingers clutched from wringing them. Are you okay? She asked in a small voice. Yeah, Finn said hoarsely. Just, got a little too worked up. Oh. They were silent for what felt like eons, though it couldn't have been more than a few seconds. It was hard to tell in the candlelight, but he was positive she was blushing. Or perhaps that was the flush from kissing. The library was so quiet now. So quiet he wondered with no small amount of embarrassment how loud they'd been. Or maybe that was the rushing in his ears. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I shouldn't have brought you here. Genevieve blinked, the only confusion she'd show. Tell me what you're thinking. Finn met her eyes and saw the fear there. And maybe a little hurt. She didn't know why he'd suddenly pulled away. How could she? She couldn't read minds. And he'd only pulled away after she'd started kissing him with more fervor. When she'd had more control. And he'd pushed her away. Realizing how she was interpreting it, he winced. Finn tilted her face upward, brushing her cheeks with a thumb. I'm sorry. It wasn't you. I went too far. No, I went too far, Finn said firmly. Maybe not yet, but I was thinking it. Genevieve blinked, a blush definitely flooding her cheeks this time. Oh. Yeah, sorry. Don't apologize when I was the one egging you on. Well, still. They lapsed into an awkward silence. Desperate to smooth things over, Finn breathed a laugh. If it's any consolation, for not knowing what you're doing, you're really good at it. A smile broke onto her face and she touched his wrists, that happy look returning to her eyes. She kissed his palm. Well, I aim to please. Ha. Finn breathed. I think we'll need to discuss that. So we don't get carried away. I don't. Gods, he couldn't say it. He couldn't tell her all the reasons why, regarding Rain and his past with other girls, but he wanted her to understand why it was so important. Jenny. He swiped her cheek again. I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to fool around with you and disrespect you like that. It's not about being beautiful because you're so much more than that. You're kind and talented and smart. Genevieve tried to look away, fighting a smile. Finn. And the last thing I want is for it to look like all I was after was a pretty face. I don't think that, Genevieve said. I never once thought that was what you were after. Maybe not, but I don't want to take advantage of you. Or he stilled when she raised a finger to his lips, gently silencing him. You're not, she said firmly. If I wasn't enjoying it just as much as you, don't you think I would have stopped you? And I have no doubts in my mind that if I ever asked you to stop, you would. I trust you, Finn. And if you don't want us to get too carried away, if you want to set up boundaries because you want to do right by me, because you don't want to go too far, then we will. It's a good idea. She smiled slightly, lowering her hand at last. Frankly, it's a very good idea. I know if we were to take things further, we'd regret it. And boy, did he understand what that sort of regret felt like. He felt horrible after Rain, and while they technically hadn't had sex, they'd gone plenty far enough for him to hate himself for it. If he ever allowed himself to go that far with Genevieve, or further. His heart lurched in his chest. If he ever took that from her, if he was ever that proud or selfish in allowing himself to let lust take over. Even if she wanted to, it didn't make it right. Genevieve deserved to be dated, or courted, as her family put it, the proper way. She might not want to be as demure and traditional as her family, but that didn't mean she needed to be tempted to swing in the complete opposite direction. And Finn. He'd regretted everything that had happened with Rain for so long. He'd been so intent that when he dated again, he would do it right. No more fooling around, no more using her to satisfy some need to be in control or his manly urges. No, he was going to treat her right. Gods, it was hard. It would continue to be hard, to not let his thoughts or hands wander. But if Genevieve was the one, then it would be well worth the sacrifice, the wait. And if by some extenuating circumstance she wasn't the girl he was meant to be with, then they would not have that level of regret between them. That they took that special sort of experience away from their future spouses, if that was to be their future. I agree. I think we should still talk about it more in greater detail, but I'm glad we're on the same page, he said finally, something loosening in his chest at the small smile that sprang to her face. He didn't fight it when Genevieve stood on tiptoes and kissed him again. The material of her dress was soft against his hands as he held her at an acceptable distance, even if she still pushed in a little closer. Despite the boundaries he knew they'd have to create, to keep temptation at bay, he couldn't help the little thrill in his chest. That joy that she wanted him just as much as he wanted her. She pulled away gently, dark eyes glowing in the candlelight. Finn pressed his forehead to hers, even as she touched the Sullivan crest hanging at his chest. Well, Genevieve sighed through her nose. I suppose we should make His Highness presentable again. Finn laughed, even as she stepped back and retrieved his shirt from the floor several feet away. Well, at least we learned something new today, he said, smirking as she raised her brows. That if I ever want to surprise you, all I have to do is bite. Genevieve choked, even as he laughed harder. You'd better pray to all the gods you didn't leave a mark to, or you're a dead man. The mirth died instantly. I didn't, did I? I mean, if I did, I'm sorry. Did you bring any scarves? I'm sure Adriana. His shirt launched into his face and he pulled it away, grinning. He blinked at the sight of Genevieve pulling aside the collar of her shirt, at her pale skin glimmering in the dark. Do you see anything? Finn shook his head, blinking hard. Not in here, it's too dark. She huffed. Well, I guess we'll find out tomorrow, won't we? If I find a bruise, I think payback is in order. Ah, how so? Finn asked, pulling on his shirt and quickly doing the buttons. A just punishment I shall dole out at a later date, Genevieve said, tossing him his vest. She squinted. And no, I did not mean by giving you one to match. Finn felt his face burn. Well, I'm sorry. Unless you want the whole of the archipelago to know. No, that's okay. They grinned at each other. Finn quickly fixed his shirt and vest while Genevieve tried to smooth her hair. It didn't seem to do much good. The more she patted it down, the more curls seemed to stick up at odd directions. She huffed in annoyance. "I like it, you know," Finn said. "Your hair." Genevieve rolled her eyes, lifting the long tresses off her neck and beginning to pull it back. "Well, that makes one of us. I mean it. I never knew I had a thing for curly hair until I met you, but I love it." Unable to resist, he reached out and tugged at a ringlet that had slipped free, too short for the ponytail. "Well, it's a curse, plain and simple," Genevieve said, tying it off and waving at her face. "It's thick and puffy and I can't brush it." "Why?" "Because my brush would lodge itself into said curls and never come out again. I'd have to hack all my hair off to get it out." Finn gaped, devastated at the idea. Genevieve could never have short hair. As long as he was around, he'd never allow it. "Anyway, maybe we should head back." Genevieve hustled to blow out the candles. Finn followed, taking the ones in the back, making sure not to miss any. If he got the library burned down, his father would kill him. He met Genevieve at the door, taking her hand and leading her outside. Night had fallen, stars twinkling overhead. A full moon lit the village below as they crept around the edge, the revelries inside the great hall still in full swing. Finn checked his appearance as best he could in the nearest torchlight. "How do I look?" Genevieve bit her lip and reached up to fix his hair. "Like some vixen got her claws in you and refused to let go for a good, long while." He smirked, lowering his voice as the sound of hurried footsteps registered from the stairs below. "She'd better be careful. Whatever would my betrothed say?" Her fingers stilled momentarily, dark eyes locking on his before lighting mischievously in the torchlight. That adorable little smirk was nearly enough to set his heart on fire again. Before she could reply, however, a set of guards sprinted up the stairs, panting. They made for the doors, but one paused as he spotted Finn standing nearby. "Sir." The others paused, following him as he approached, the ends of their spears clacking against the stone. "Sir," Genevieve whispered, looping her arm through his and stepping aside. "Sure," Finn said, ignoring her grin. Turning to the men, he straightened. "What is it?" "The outcasts," the guard breathed, nodding toward the village. A quick glance around the pillar and sure enough, a mass of people could be seen heading toward the stairs in the darkness. "They're here." "Figures," Finn said. "I'll tell my dad for you." "There's something else," the guard said, his face tense. "It's a matter of urgency." Finn squinted. "Okay." The guard glanced at Genevieve and Finn almost told him to spit it out, but Genevieve seemed to remember protocol before he did. "It's all right," Genevieve said. She stepped up on tiptoes and kissed his cheek. "I'll see you inside." Finn fought the happy smile, not wanting to look foolish in front of his dad's men. "All right." Genevieve released his arm and marched to the doors. A cacophony of sound interrupted the silence as the doors opened, a stream of golden-orange light filtering onto the stones. She smiled at him again, warming his heart before stepping inside and disappearing. The doors thudded shut behind her with a boom. The guards' amused smiles died away instantly when they turned back to see Finn crossing his arms, nothing but blue steel in his eyes. "Well. XXX. If Genevieve had thought the Great Hall was stuffy before they left, it was nothing on how it felt now. Between all the people, dragons and fires burning in the braziers and pits throughout the massive hall, it was positively roasting now. And if the outcasts were finally arriving, nearly 3 hours overdue, it was only bound to get hotter. It was a few minutes before she found her friends, not far from where she'd left them. Adriana was looking a little droopy, but she was chatting with a dark-haired girl with piercing blue eyes, who turned to her and froze. "Hello." Genevieve held out a hand. "I'm Jen." "Oh, I know who you are," the girl said flatly. Genevieve blinked. The girl's eyes were a piercing blue, but so much different than Finn's. Where his reminded her of open skies and glittering seas, this girl's, they reminded her of glaciers, cold, cunning and uncharted. "You're Miss Pampered Princess from Jet," the girl added, tossing her dark braid over her shoulder. "You make a good match for Mr. Perfect." Genevieve started, but before she could so much as consider a response, Adriana spoke. "Inga, there's no reason to be rude. Again, Genevieve was reminded of Hiccup when she saw the anger in her eyes. Inga gave her a simpering smile. Don't stress yourself, love. Not a good place to drop a baby. With a reproachful look at Genevieve, the girl stood up and stalked off into the crowd. Confused, Genevieve watched her go. She'd never met the girl before, so she had no inkling why she'd been so rude. What could she possibly have done? Jen, don't stress about her, Adriana said, patting the seat beside her. There's nothing to be done. She took the seat but couldn't leave it be. I assume she's a friend of yours. Eric nodded. She is, but she's been struggling with some things as of late. Which gives her no excuse to be nasty, Adriana said again. Well, you know what they say about jealousy, Cliff said, stretching his arms high over his head. No, what do they say about jealousy? Taryn asked. Jealousy is the cousin of greed, Cliff said. We seem to focus on what we want and lose sight of what we really need. Genevieve cocked her head. She hadn't known him for very long, but profound statements did not seem to be his forte. Then again. You know, Cliff, Eric said in amazement. That might be the wisest thing you've ever said. Oh well, thanks, bruh. Finn. Genevieve called as he appeared, stalking down the aisle. Hey bruh. Cliff called. Want to hear what they say about? Finn didn't spare them a passing glance as he kept moving, blue eyes roving the crowds. As if he was looking for someone. Genevieve frowned, watching as he screeched to a halt, then began pushing his way through the crowds. What? Taryn asked. They watched as he finally found his quarry, Hiccup. He pulled his dad from the middle of a group of men who'd been deep in conversation, looking disgruntled at the disruption. They watched as Finn began talking quickly and quietly, nodding toward the doors. Oh, the outcasts are here, Genevieve remembered. I forgot. They groaned. I hate the outcasts, Cliff muttered. No, it's not that, Eric said, watching as Hiccup and Finn began marching toward the doors with tense expressions. Toothless bounded ahead of them, people yelping and dodging as the Night Fury's growl rumbled through the hall. Something's wrong. Before Genevieve could ask, a shattering boom sounded at the doors. The oaken doors banged against the stone walls as they were thrown open by a pair of tall, well-muscled men clad in black. They stood sentry as a woman with dirty blonde hair strolled inside, a distasteful frown on her face. Thin double swords crossed over her shoulders, the black leather of her clothing similar to what her group of followers wore. The only differentiating factor from the others was the intimidating crest of the massive Viking helmet and skull on the thin metal armor she wore. The great hall slowly went still and silent at the newcomers, as if someone had thrown a blanket over their senses. As if they'd all realized they were suddenly not among friends. Ali, Cliff whispered. Does she look scarier than she usually does? Ali the insincere? Genevieve asked. Chief of the outcasts. She certainly looked the part. Adriana gasped suddenly, a sharp sound that had Eric grabbing her hand. Annie. What? Her green eyes were wide, terrified. Pinned on the outcasts. No, Genevieve realized, as Finn and Hiccup met the troop of outcasts filtering into the hall, as they all took various stances of dominance. Various men and women, many of them Burkians, and the other chieftains rose from their seats. Genevieve realized then that half a dozen guards had closed ranks around their table, hands within easy distance of their weapons. But Adriana wasn't focused on any of that. No, she only had eyes for one man in particular in the group. Standing just to the right of Ali, his brown hair shaggy but not unkempt and blue eyes clear, was a man dressed in a leather riding suit of his own, daggers glinting at his belt alongside the sword at his hip. A harsh scar sliced down the right side of his face from brow to chin. And he was smirking at Hiccup and Finn as if he'd been waiting a long, long time for this moment. Who is that? Genevieve whispered, though she felt it in her bones, that she already knew. Adriana trembled, even as she wrapped her arms around the full swell of her belly. Brandine. Chapter 44, Unmasking the Traitor. Chapter text. Hiccup had months to figure out what he'd do when he crossed paths with Brandine again. He hadn't exactly been decisive, the variety of options of punishment at his disposal. Indeed, it was hard to choose, and it would vary based on his mood. No punishment ever seemed strong enough for what Brandine had done to his daughter. But when Brandine strolled right into the great hall with an audience as large as the one currently gathered at Hiccup's back, he knew Brandine had come prepared. After all, what better time to make a grand entrance than during a peace treaty, when Hiccup could do nothing? Indeed, Brandine smirked at him, even as Hiccup crossed his arms. Toothless growled lowly, as if waiting for Hiccup's order to pounce and tear him to shreds. Thinking past the rage bubbling in his chest, however, Hiccup kept his mouth tightly shut. Finn trembled at his side. They couldn't make a scene though, not here in front of everyone. Peace treaty aside, Adriana was in here somewhere. She wouldn't want the extra attention. Hiccup briefly prayed his men had caught on and closed ranks around Eric and Adriana. He'd been afraid this might happen, though he wasn't altogether surprised. It was smart, showing up here at this time. He'd charged his men accordingly. If Brandine or any of his cronies showed up, they didn't get within 20 feet of his daughter or her family. Ali clicked her tongue. Don't mind this one, he's just here for decoration. Indeed, Hiccup said, leashing his anger. He does seem to draw attention. Brandine's smirk broadened, tinged with glee. Finn made a sound of anger and started to move forward, but Hiccup quickly grabbed his arm. They didn't need a brawl in the doorway. Yes, I would keep a leash on him, Ali said. Fighting on the first day does not a continued peace treaty make. To her people, she nodded them toward the great hall. Go play. Ali strolled past them as her people slipped into the crowd. The Jatans especially leaned away, as if afraid to let the outcasts get too close. Good. They were fast learners then. Brandine took his time walking past them. Finn tensed as their eyes met and he opened his mouth, but Hiccup squeezed his arm tightly and gave him a warning look. Finn glared. What? Don't. I'm not just. Finn whipped around as Brandine strolled past. Where do you think you're going? Brandine turned an amused look over his shoulder. You heard my chief. Feel free to mingle. So that's what I'm going to do. You disgusting piece of. The rest of Finn's curse was cut off when Hiccup shoved him away. Toothless also shoved himself between them, as if he too understood that they didn't need any fights. Brandine snorted. That's right, Hiccup, call off your guard, dog. At least someone knows how to play the game. Hiccup gritted his teeth even as he and Toothless held Finn back. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched Brandine turn and walk up the center aisle. The noise in the great hall slowly rose to a normal volume, but he could see many of the Burkean glares being sent Brandine's way as he strode past. Past Adriana and Eric's table. Dad, have you lost your mind? Finn hissed. Hiccup watched as Brandine merely walked by and sent a smile their way. Eric and Genevieve slid closer to Adriana. The guards surrounding their table tightened their grip on their weapons, but it wasn't needed. Brandine didn't make any moves. As he disappeared into the crowd, Hiccup turned back to Finn, whose face was red with anger. Finn, we can't do anything about it. Like hell we can't, Finn said. After all this time he has the guts to come here. That's exactly the point, Hiccup interrupted. He's here because we can't do anything. Really? Because from where I'm standing, there's very little point to letting him roam free in our territory after what he did. Finn, think. This is a peace sanction. This is the perfect time for him to show up. No. Listen to me, Hiccup hissed, shaking his son's arm enough to make their eyes meet. If we try to arrest him, Ali could declare that we're breaking the laws of the peace sanction. It doesn't matter what the crime is, we cannot cast judgment on anyone else from the other tribes. This is the time to renew the peace treaty. Screw the peace treaty, Finn whispered hoarsely. You're going to let him walk around the island free without a second thought. What about the Jatans? I know it was him who attacked Jat, he's been a part of the raids. We don't have proof of that. The only one we know without a shadow of a doubt was there is Kale, and he's mysteriously absent. What about Anna? You're going to make her endure this? Make her watch him strut around and wonder when he's going to make his move? Hiccup released his arm. If I could spare her from any of this, Finn, I would, but there's only so much I can do. The best I can do right now is give them protection. She wouldn't need protection if we'd just clap irons on him and hold him until after the treaty is over. No, Finn. Whether it was Brandine's scheming or Ali's, they played their cards well. Now let me play mine. Don't do anything stupid. Finn was breathing hard like an irate bull. You can't be serious. You want me to sit by and... Yes. That's what I said. You said you wouldn't hold me back. Hiccup paused, momentarily stunned. He'd forgotten about that conversation, his promise that one day he'd let Finn avenge his sister for what Brandine had done to her and that he wouldn't stand in the way. I know, Hiccup said gently. Maybe that's exactly why he's here. Because I can't let you lose here. Finn opened his mouth to argue but Hiccup cut him off. My word is final. We can't risk the lives of our entire village for our own vengeance. If he's foolish enough to stick around on Saturday, he's yours. But until then, we can't do anything. Promise me you won't do anything. Finn scoffed in disgust and shouldered past him. What good is a promise if you don't keep it? Hiccup huffed and watched him go, frustrated. He understood. He really did. But as much as he might want to avenge his baby girl, as much as he might want to make Brandine hurt and bleed and suffer for every ounce of pain he'd put her through, he couldn't be that selfish. He was the chief of Burke. He had thousands of lives depending on him. He couldn't afford to be selfish right now. As much as it pained him to make that choice, he had to. When Brandine strode past their table, Adriana's heart ratcheted in her chest so hard she thought it might burst. Eric's arm was firm around her waist and Genevieve gripped her hand beneath the table. The girl might not know every detail of their story but she was smart. She knew exactly who the boy was. Brandine turned his face toward them and time seemed to slow as their eyes met. She stopped feeling Eric's arm and Genevieve's hand, stopped sensing the presence of the guards surrounding them. Stopped hearing the whispers and murmurs of the tense crowd. Brandine's face stretched in a smirk that threw the scar on his face, the scar she'd given him, into sharp relief against the torchlight. Brandine blinked and looked away, and time resumed. Sounds flooded back and the stifling heat of the hall hit her like a wall. Then Eric's hand was on her chin, pulling her focus to him, even as Brandine disappeared into the crowd. Annie. Is she all right? Genevieve asked behind her. Adriana took a long deep breath, forcing down the panic that threatened to well up. She couldn't lose it here. Not right now. Wordlessly, she took Eric's hand and squeezed it. He watched her with a look of concern, trying to gauge her emotions. She didn't have words for herself, let alone for him. Here, take a drink of cider. Genevieve set a cup down in front of her. It will help. Her hand shook slightly, but indeed, the sharp tang of the warm cider and cinnamon and something sweet, perhaps caramel, filled her with warmth. There, now you have some of your color back, Genevieve said, dark eyes darting to Hiccup and Finn whispering angrily. The latter muttered something over his shoulder and stalked away. Adriana wondered briefly if he was going to find Brandine, but instead he joined their table with crossed arms. Genevieve set a hand on his elbow but he didn't seem to notice. His blue eyes darted around the room as if daring one of the outcasts to approach the table. Indeed, with his hackles so clearly raised, many people who'd been gawking quickly turned away or returned to their meals and conversations. He won't do anything, Eric said. He'd be an idiot to make trouble here with so many allies around us. Just the fact that he's here is trouble enough, Adriana said, feeling suddenly sick to her stomach. She'd made it a point to stop dancing around Brandine's name, but now that he was back, she had a bad feeling. As if saying his name would bring him to her table, and if that happened, she didn't know what she'd do. I want to go home, she whispered. Then let's go, a familiar female voice said in her ear. She looked up in surprise to see her mom shouldering past the guards. Astrid took her arm and helped her stand. Genevieve stayed with Cliff and Taryn, who were strangely silent as they watched them go. Hiccup joined them as their small group marched to the doors, wrapping his arm around Adriana's waist. They retrieved their coats and quickly left the hall. She barely felt the cold as they walked, snow and patches of ice crunching beneath their feet as they walked down the stairs and into the village. Finn kept his eyes on neighboring streets for any stragglers. Her parents were talking to Eric in low voices, the guards forming ranks. Was this to be her life? Ushered from place to place. living in fear of what Brandine would do next. A spark of anger ignited in her chest and she faltered, the group pausing with her. "Annie?" Eric asked. "Why didn't you arrest him?" Adriana asked her dad, a bit louder than she'd meant. Hiccup winced. "Not here, Addie. Tell me." "Not in the cold and not where the walls have ears," Hiccup said, nodding at Eric, who kept a firm grip on her arm and ushered her along. She pulled her arm away in irritation. "I might be fat, but I can still walk." Eric frowned but said nothing. The rest of the trip was silent until finally they arrived at their little house. The Haddocks followed them inside and Hiccup locked the door. Eric quickly started on a fire as Astrid helped Adriana hang up her coat. The guards, Adriana realized, had stayed outside. A beacon for their location, should Brandine come looking. "Answer the question," Adriana said, crossing her arms. "Why didn't you arrest him?" Finn's jaw was clenched but he said nothing as he paced the small living space. Hiccup sighed, shoving his hands into his hair where snowflakes had landed. "Addie, it's complicated." "What do you mean, complicated?" "We're in the middle of a peace sanction," Astrid began. "Actually it just started," Adriana argued, surprised at her own anger. "Surely you can still arrest him." "No, Addie," Hiccup said, lowering his hands. "I can't. If I do, Ali could claim we're not following the laws of the peace sanction and declare war. For one disgusting piece of trash?" Eric asked darkly. The fire rose in the pit and warmth began to fill the room. Shadows flickered across his face as he stood and faced them. "She'd declare war for one man." "Maybe Brandine is the bait," Astrid said. "She's been itching to declare war on us for years anyway. Maybe when he decided to crash on Outcast Island." "He wasn't on Outcast Island when I looked," Hiccup said. "Sure, 5-6 months ago," Adriana said bitterly. "Maybe he's been there all this time and isn't living with his mom. Ever think of that?" Hiccup blinked in surprise at her anger and said nothing. "Adria," Astrid said, lifting her hands. "We know this is very upsetting. That's putting it lightly. But we have to stay calm. The same applies to Brandine and Ali, we're in a peace sanction. They can't do anything." "Actually, he can," Hiccup said with a touch of dread in his voice. Adriana's heart leaped. "What? What can he do?" Eric's gaze was hard on his father-in-law, tense as a board. Hiccup swallowed. "He still has time to claim rights to the baby." Just like that, her anger disappeared. She felt a little weak-kneed at the thought and staggered back. Eric jerked forward but her mom was already there, ushering her into a nearby chair. What do you mean?" Adriana said, feeling a cold sense of dread wash over her. "I thought when Eric and I got married, we changed that." Hiccup rubbed his forehead. "It does, but the biological father still has rights to claim through the pregnancy and up to 2 weeks after the birth." The house was silent before Finn exhaled a breath of air that sounded like only half of a laugh. "Of course there's a loophole." "I know," Hiccup muttered. "Trust me, I was not happy to read it." "And when was this?" Eric demanded. "When were you going to tell us about it?" "I discovered it last week, if you must know," Hiccup said sharply. "And I didn't want to tell you and cause you extra stress." "You're already past your due date, Addie." "I didn't. But now he's here and he could claim rights to the baby." Adriana cried, frustrated at the tears that prickled behind her eyes. "I know you want to protect me but you can't protect me from everything. When it concerns my baby and my future, don't you think we should have been told?" "Yes," Hiccup said, in just above a whisper. "I'm sorry. He made that decision with me," Astrid said. "It wasn't just him. You can blame both of us." "It is what it is," Eric huffed, rubbing his face. "What do we do now?" Hiccup's eyes were heavy and sad on hers. Adriana wanted to be angry but Eric was right. They couldn't change it. They needed to think about what they were going to do next. The baby could literally come at any time, seeing as she was already overdue. "We'll have to hope and pray he doesn't make a claim," Astrid said. "That's really all we can do." Finn scoffed. "Oh yeah, that seems like a great idea. Let's just wait and see what happens." Not to mention he's a disgusting piece of filth that should have no rights at all. What would you have us do, Finn? I'd have us do something first, Finn said. Why wait around for him to make his move? Why let Adriana and Eric sit around and stress about the possibility when we could prevent it in the first place? No, Hiccup said. We already talked about this and no. There's nothing we can do. I don't accept that. Neither do I, Eric said. We can't just sit around and wait, Hiccup. We are not putting this entire village in jeopardy. Why not? Adriana asked, her anger returning. You did it once for me, you can do it again. Hiccup huffed. It's not the same thing. Say he makes a claim and it's granted, you and Eric would have the baby for 2 weeks a month and Brandine would have the baby the remaining 2 weeks. No. Adriana shouted in horror. Listen to me, Addy. He can't deny your presence, so you would go with. Why is this a good idea? Finn demanded. Shut up. Eric said in a fierce tone they rarely heard. As opposed to Astrid and me when you two were little, we had absolutely no rights. Hiccup slashed a hand through the air. At all. They would have taken you both away and we would have never seen you again. Dager could have done anything he wanted with you. It's different. Going to war over my kid's entire future would be worth it. Not to mention losing Maya since we were told that we couldn't have any more children. But you and Eric would still have a hand in this baby's life. Oh well, that's just perfect, Adriana snarled, tears blurring her vision now. You're telling me that I'll just have to wait for Brandine to call the shots and then we have only half the time to raise my child. Hiccup got on his knees before her and took her hands. Addy, listen. Who was Brandine's father? Adriana sniffed. What? Who was his father? Confused, she briefly forgot the tears. Dager. What does that have to do with anything? Finn asked. It has to do with everything, Hiccup said. Pressing a finger to Adriana's belly, he said, Brandine could make 2 claims during these meetings. That he wants to be a father or that he wants to reclaim his right as heir. And I'm willing to bet that if he makes a claim for one, he won't make a claim for the other. Couldn't he do both? Astrid asked. Technically, but it's confusing enough. I think he'll only focus on one or the other. Wait, Eric said, rubbing his eyes. Which claim do you think he'll make? I think right now he'll make a claim on the baby, Hiccup said. Because he'll want to keep his heritage a secret for a little while longer and try to win back Berserker, which I know for a fact is divided when it comes to the old versus the new. Not everyone on Berserker loves the changes Sven has made. Brandine will want to secure an heir before he takes back the throne and he already has one. Our politics, Finn said, sighing. But if he makes a claim for the throne and title, Hiccup said. Then I bet he's not going to want to raise a child on top of it. He wouldn't go for that, Hiccup, Astrid said. He'll make a play for the child. Exactly, Hiccup nodded. That's why we're going to reveal his little secret. Adriana blinked. How? Finn asked. I told you, Finn, he thinks he has all the cards but he's not the only one playing the game. Let me play my hand. But. Adriana said, her brain buzzing with all the information, all the possibilities. What if you're wrong? What if he does claim the baby? Hiccup pursed his lips. There's only one loophole I could find. What is it? It doesn't matter, it's not happening. Why are you the one to make the decision? If there's some way to get past this. Eric would have to fight in a duel to the death, just as I did. Hiccup's words a quick rush of air. Only then would he have full rights, and by extension, you. Adriana felt her limbs go cold. She stared up at Eric, who blinked back at her in shock. Dad's right on this one, Finn said hoarsely. That's not happening. Eric scowled. I believe this decision is between me and my wife. Thanks for the note of confidence, by the way. You'd be so willing to sacrifice yourself? Finn demanded. If you lose, Astrid said firmly. Then he gets the parental rights anyway. It would still be split 50-50 between him and Adriana. But if I won? Absolutely not. Adriana said in a shrill voice. Annie. No. Adriana said, pulling herself out of her chair and advancing on him so quickly that Hiccup had to jump out of the way. Eric took a step back at her sudden ferocity. She poked him hard in the chest. I had to watch my dad leave for that duel, and it was one of the worst days of my life. He barely survived it. I absolutely forbid you, Eric Larson, from even thinking. All right. Eric said quickly, resting his hands on her shoulders. Okay, Annie, I won't. I won't, just relax. Her heart pounded so hard in her chest, Adriana felt a bit lightheaded. It wasn't until he forced her to sit down on the couch that she realized she was breathing quite hard. This is too much stress for you, Astrid said, sitting beside her. Take a deep breath. Finn, get her some water. Finn obeyed without argument, leaving them in silence for a few moments until he returned with the water. She sipped it, listening to the silence, waiting for her heartbeat to slow. So we wait, Eric finally said, drawing their attention. We wait for Brandine to make his move. Hopefully it won't come to that, Hiccup said. One shouldn't show their hand too early in the game, but I don't plan to bide my time either. This isn't a game, Adriana said in a tired voice. It's our baby's entire life. Which is infinitely more important. I know, Addie. No one knows this better than we do. Hiccup straightened and suddenly looked at them all with a hard expression. Which is why none of you are going anywhere without bodyguards. Not even you, Finn. I don't need bodyguards, Finn growled. I'm not taking any chances. Hiccup's voice was stern and left little room for argument. Because if someone gets twitchy and kills you, then who is the next heir to Burke, Finn? Finn blinked. Anna. It's always been Anna. And by extension. His blue eyes dropped to Adriana's belly and he stared. The baby, but that means. Our baby could be the heir to 2 tribes, Eric whispered. If the hand is played right. Adriana closed her eyes and dropped her hands to her belly. She received a poke back in response. For the first time ever, she wondered if Brandine had planned all this from the very beginning. Now Hiccup murmured. You see why I didn't want to tell you. Hours later, Eric watched Adriana sleep in the darkness of their room. The family had left them in peace once the tribes had dispersed, filling the streets with raucous laughter and making it easy for Finn and his parents to slip into the crowd. Adriana had wisely pointed out that a platoon of guards standing outside their house would only make them easy targets, so Hiccup had swiftly told the guards to station themselves somewhere low-key where they could still keep an eye on all corners of the house. Eric hated it. He hated that he couldn't protect his family or so much as guarantee their safety. He hated that Hiccup had to go to such lengths. He hated that Brandine chose now to come back into their lives, that he'd been sly and cunning to choose now of all times, when they could do nothing to arrest him and Adriana could give birth at any time. He hated that the child she carried, their child, would be a pawn in the game of men who would use him or her to their advantage. At least Adriana was sleeping peacefully now. She'd been antsy and stressed after the others had left. Mercifully it hadn't taken long for her to fall asleep, curled onto her side, her blonde hair a blanket across the pillow. Gingerly he brushed a stray lock of hair out of her eyes and pressed a kiss to her temple. He wouldn't be voiceless in this. He'd do whatever it took to protect her. To protect their baby. They weren't just mere pawns in some game. He would not sit by and let others call the shots for him and his family. So when he rose from bed, dressed and left the house, Adriana did not wake. A guard stepped out of the shadows as he left through the back door. He raised a finger to his lips and showed his face from beneath the cloak. He whispered, "I'll be back before dawn," and crept off into the darkness. The guards wouldn't allow anyone near the house, not if they'd seen him so easily. He trusted them. He trotted through the streets, avoiding drunks and partygoers, most of them he noted from other tribes. Metal barrels of fire made for decent beacons where villagers gathered and shared stories, whispered opinions about the upcoming meetings. Eric ignored them all and kept to the shadows until he made it to the stairs leading to the Great Hall. He took them 2 at a time, breathing hard and legs burning by the time he reached the top. He glanced around, but not seeing. "You're late." Eric turned in time to see Finn emerge from behind a nearby column. He also wore a cloak and dark, nondescript clothing. "It doesn't matter. I'm here now." Without another word they marched around the sidewalk that curved around the base of the Great Hall, skirting any torches that burned in brackets on the wall. The sides of the hall were plunged in darkness, sending a wave of cold so deep Eric shivered, but he didn't pause until they arrived at the library. They stepped inside and locked the door behind them. It was pitch black until he heard a snap and a flash of light appeared. Finn lit a few of the closest candles and then held out a small box of matches toward him. He threw back his hood and stared down one of the aisles, as if lost in some memory. But before Eric could so much as ask, Finn turned to him with a look of ice in his eyes and said, "Let's get started." If Genevieve thought anything of him at this particular moment, Finn dearly hoped it wasn't that he looked as tired as he felt. He hadn't returned to the house until almost dawn and managed to get a little sleep before meeting her for breakfast as promised. The first meeting started at 9, which gave them just over an hour to eat and talk. Except, perhaps for the first time, he didn't feel like talking. Not with her, he was just beyond exhausted. He'd surely be regretting his decision later, but it was worth it. "Are you listening to me?" Finn jolted upright and fiercely rubbed his eyes. "Yes." "No. I'm sorry, what?" Genevieve snorted and slid her coffee across the table. "Maybe you should drink this." "I don't drink coffee." "You do now." A frown stubbornly at the cup, but he considered it. He'd never really had any desire to drink coffee, and from what he'd heard it just started a season of addiction issues and made one thirsty, likely from dehydration. Plus it stained people's teeth. Yet he had a feeling that mere moments ago he'd been about to find himself with a face full of eggs and bacon. Sighing, he lifted the cup and took a sip. It was hot and earthy with cream and something sweet. Not caramel like her usual. Sugar. Half a teaspoon of sugar and a drop of vanilla cream. Finn said, taking another sip and considering it. "You know, it's not half bad. I do love changing lives for the better." Genevieve grinned. "I'll go make another." No, Finn slid her cup back. "That's quite enough. Anyway, what were you saying before?" "I don't remember." "Why you are so tired? Did you stay late at your sister's?" Finn scowled at his half-eaten breakfast. "Something like that." Genevieve raised a brow but didn't press him. "Are they going to be okay?" "As okay as they can be," Finn said with a sigh. "It's just frustrating." Though he'd been half asleep, he'd told her what his parents had said on the way to the Great Hall. "Well, it's not as if Brandine has to wait until the baby is born to make a claim," Genevieve said in a low voice. "That's the most frustrating part. The fact that he can even make a claim up to 2 weeks after the baby is born." "I know, and the only way to fight it is for Eric to fight him to the death." Finn shook his head, watching as a large troop of villagers from Brawn and Frisk entered the Great Hall. "Eric has learned a lot about fighting recently, and the odds were stacked against my dad when he fought Dager, too. But..." Thin, warm fingers wrapped around his across the table and he met her sympathetic gaze. "You don't want him to get hurt." "I understand." "It's more than that," Finn said, wrapping her hand in both of his. He suddenly found it hard to meet her eyes. "I'm just tired of people hurting my family. I can take it, but my family has suffered enough. Peace treaty or no, I'm not going to sit by and just let him have his way with my sister. Not this time." "What can you do though?" Genevieve asked. "They said there was nothing to be done. If Brandine makes a claim, there's only one way to change that, and that's if Eric isn't going to fight him. I won't allow it." "You haven't answered my question." "What can you do?" Finn swallowed hard and finally looked up. "Probably something stupid." Genevieve squinted. "Tell me." "I can't." "Finn." "Promise me," Finn interrupted. "That no matter what happens, you won't get involved." She stared, her hands squeezing his tightly. He could see her mind working, see her trying to figure out what the loophole was and find out what he had planned. But he couldn't tell her and she wouldn't find out. Not until it was too late. "I don't know if I can promise that," she finally said. "Then when you find out, will you promise to support me at least?" Genevieve pursed her lips, that adorable little pucker drawing his gaze for just a moment. He forced himself to meet her stare with a firm look of his own. There was no heat in it. Just a simple request that though they might disagree on things, though she hated being in the dark, though he knew she would hate him for what he was about to do, her support was all he needed. Her expression softened. I wish you would tell me. But yes. I trust you. Feeling freer than he had moments before, Finn reached up and twisted a blonde curl around his finger. I don't deserve you, General. She smiled and looked at their intertwined hands. Her thumb swiped across a scar on the back of his palm, likely from forge work or training. He had so many he couldn't remember where he'd gotten it. Her smile fell away and she exhaled slowly through her nose and gave him a solemn look. I'm curious about something. Finn raised a brow. Fire away. Well, she withdrew her hands and reached into a pocket sewn into the lining of her blue dress. He vaguely thought the color looked nice on her, but the thought vanished when she pulled a small paper note from the pocket. Holding it up with a frown, she twisted it so he could see the words. He already knew what it said without the gesture. I've been trying to think of how to ask about this without sounding, well, nosy, I guess. But... Genevieve set the paper down and stared at it. I guess it just came out of nowhere and it wasn't like the other times you said you missed me. It just made me worry a little bit. Finn remembered lying awake the night Dana had attacked him. The tears had come against his will, even after he thought he'd spent any emotion on his dad and Cliff. The shame and disgust he'd felt that night after Dana's attack had made feel dirty in a way he couldn't explain. It had taken some time for it to really go away. The only thing that came close was the shame he'd felt after his tryst with Rain, but that had been his choice. His own decisions had led him to that point and he had to live with the consequences of his actions, both emotional and physical. What Dana had done, he hadn't asked for that. He hadn't wanted it. And that fact more than anything had led him to write those 3 words on a sheet of paper in the middle of the night and send it to Genevieve. Because more than anything else that night, he'd missed her. Knowing that there was someone out there who cared about him that wasn't a blood relative, who would never force herself on him in that way, was the only bit of comfort that had helped him fall asleep. He realized he'd been silent for some time, lost in his thoughts. Genevieve was watching, waiting, those dark midnight eyes hard on him. Suddenly he felt tired for an entirely different reason. Clearing his throat, he leaned forward on his arms and fiddled with the paper. Something bad happened that night. She didn't reply, scanning his face. Debating if she should ask or not. He met her eyes and tried to convey that if she wanted to ask, she could. He knew if he stubbornly avoided eye contact then she would back off. Even though his insides squirmed at the thought of reliving that night even for a few minutes to explain what happened, he wanted to tell her. She trusted him. He wanted to trust her. There was a girl, Finn whispered, who used to live here. She always had a more loose lifestyle and went after guys she found attractive. He thought of Cliff and he felt a spear of anger. Or guys she thought were weak and helpless. Anyway, he couldn't meet her eyes. Even as he sensed her horror, there was no hiding the flush that rose to his face. He exhaled and looked away, trying not to let his emotions take over. Something raw and feral squirmed in his chest that he couldn't put his finger on, but it wasn't making this any easier. Never mind, Finn. You don't have to tell me. Now I do, Finn said. I can't leave you with half a story. Or an implication of a story. Not for something like this. If you're not ready then don't tell me yet, she said. Finn watched more people trickle into the hall. Embarrassment. That's what it was squirming in his stomach. Without realizing it, she'd put him on the spot. Gods, how had Adriana survived this? This was merely a taste of the grief she'd endured. I want to tell you, he said in a hoarse whisper. But it's hard to talk about. Genevieve's chair scraped against the floor and he blinked when she stood. A flighty sense of dismay shot through him when she moved, thinking she was leaving. But he relaxed, instantly feeling a bit childish when she didn't leave, but instead took the empty seat beside him. Right in his line of sight where he'd been looking. Avoiding her eyes. It was almost as if she knew what to do, even after so little time together. Because sitting right in his line of sight forced him to face her and the story head-on. It was like she knew his fear and stubbornness and that facing it head-on would make it easier. Her knee rested against his beneath the table, even as she took his hand. Her free hand roamed his sleeve and jacket, picking off invisible bits of lint. "Take your time. But if you don't want to talk about it and save it for another time, that's fine." Warmth bloomed in his chest, though he wasn't exactly sure what for. Perhaps a variety of things, not least of which was her hand currently straightening the collar of his jacket. Some might think she was fussing over his appearance, but he knew better, even as he felt himself relax. Whenever he was tense or irritated, Genevieve always seemed to make a point to hold his hand or straighten his clothes. It was a nice distraction from the emotions he was feeling. She was the calm waters to his roaring fire. A strong and steady force of her own right, soothing and supportive and kind. And it was that understanding of her and how well she understood him that gave him the strength to tell her the story. It didn't take nearly as long as he'd thought. When it was done, he felt a little raw but clear. Like he'd put down a heavy burden he didn't realize he'd been holding all these weeks. Genevieve's expression was somber. Oh, she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm sorry." Finn didn't know what to say, but the hug was appreciated. The kiss she planted on his neck was even better. "Hey now, don't get all weepy on me." She pulled back, her face a little blotchy but clear. "No, I'm fine." She exhaled heavily and gave him an apologetic look. "I feel bad now for asking." "No, it's okay," Finn said. "We're going to be busy the rest of the week. I'm glad we got that cleared out of the way before things get crazy." "Crazy with the meetings?" Genevieve asked. "Or crazy with this thing that's going to happen that I'm supposed to support you in?" "Oh yes, life." Finn nodded. "I'd love your support for the rest of my life." She slapped his bicep and he laughed. "Seriously? Seriously?" Finn glanced around the hall. It was quickly filling up with people while normal villagers left quickly so the chieftains could have the hall in peace for the meeting. It had to be starting soon. "So how long do these meetings last?" "We're here until we break for lunch," Finn said. "Well, a little before lunch so people can set up. Technically the regular villagers don't get to hear any of the meetings." "Why?" "Utmost secrecy." "Sounds like bull-headed politics to me, but who am I to question the laws of the land?" Genevieve rolled her eyes. "You're an heir. Maybe someone should start questioning the laws of the land. It sounds like some of these written rules should be unwritten. Or just thrown out altogether," Finn said with a slow smile. "Don't forget, I'm still looking for a secretary. I'm going to need a lady around to keep all my records organized." "Exactly how many times do you plan on proposing to me before it's serious?" "As many as it takes to set in." Genevieve laughed and shook her head. "Oh, maybe one of these times I'll say yes just to see the look on your face." Finn's heart leaped a little at that, but this was just playful banter. Technically speaking, some Jotans already considered them to be engaged. The Sullivan crest hanging around his neck beneath his tunic was proof enough of that. "You wouldn't toy with a man's emotions now, would you, Jenny?" She smirked and leaned forward with a sly smile. Her fingers brushed his chest until her palm rested over his heart, which took flight at her lingering touch. "Why? Are you feeling particularly emotional right now?" Positive she could feel his heart pounding, Finn swallowed. "I'm not so sure emotional is the right word for it." Grinning, Genevieve closed the distance between them and then her lips were on his. Gentle yet tantalizing in the way she drew him in. Her fingers slid up his shoulder and twined into his hair, even as he slanted his mouth over hers and deepened the kiss. Dropping a hand to her knee, he explored the curve of her thigh, mindful to keep the touch light, even when she sharply inhaled and grabbed his wrist, pulling his hand upward until it rested on her hip. The gong sounded, signaling for the chieftains, heirs and councils to gather. They sprang apart. Finn cleared his throat and glanced around, fighting the flush that threatened to rise to his skin. They were in the great hall surrounded by the allied clans. Perhaps this wasn't the time. Then again they'd chosen a quieter nook toward the back end of the hall. There were less people. Genevieve bit her lip, which only made him want to kiss them again. "Well, I guess we should." "Yeah." Finn stood and pushed both of their chairs in when she followed. They gathered their plates and quickly joined the throng to dispose of the dishes before scurrying to their assigned places. Unfortunately they wouldn't be sitting together, as he had to sit beside his parents as heir and she would take a seat in the second row behind her brother. Well, Genevieve said with a sigh. I guess I'll see you later then. Yeah, Finn said. Before she could walk away, he hooked a hand around her waist and pulled her closer. Wish me luck. Since when have you ever needed luck? Laughing, Finn kissed her firmly. Genevieve stood on tiptoes, her fingers threading through the hair at his nape. He didn't care about the dozens of people surrounding them. He would have been content to stand there all day and just lose himself in her lips. Until someone cat-called in the crowd and another whistled shrilly. They pulled apart, Genevieve positively blushing. Finn didn't care what they thought. As far as he was concerned, he had the best girl in the room and didn't mind showing off that fact. Genevieve saw the smirk and shoved his chest. Rogue. Finn laughed and released her waist. I'll see you later. They parted ways. Finn felt much lighter and happier, despite the realization that the meetings were starting and he was to play a more prominent role. Still, as he claimed his seat on his father's left, his mother on Hiccup's right, he couldn't help but scan the crowd for the Jatan delegation around the wide round table that seated all the Allied leaders. Ivan and his wife were sitting across the table towards the left. Finn smiled when he found Genevieve taking a seat beside Kiev behind her oldest brother, right in his line of sight. His amusement fell away instantly though when he found Brandine sitting almost directly across the table from him. Brandine's dark blue eyes were already pinned on him, scanning. Though he lounged in his chair beside Ali and appeared to be bored, Finn knew better. This was the teenager who'd played them all for fools for years. He was anything but bored. A corner of Brandine's mouth lifted and his eyes darted to his right, Finn's left. It took a moment for him to realize that Brandine was looking toward Jet. To Genevieve. Clenching his jaw, Finn forced his expression to remain calm. They hadn't even started yet and Brandine was already on thin ice. Brandine merely smiled and looked away, surveying the other chieftains scattered around the table with their own delegations. So Brandine figured out he had a girlfriend now. So what? People moved on as time passed. There was no reason to smile and preen like he somehow had the upper hand. Finn knew one thing though, that if Brandine so much as looked at her the wrong way, he didn't care what his parents or the chieftains or anyone said. He'd break Brandine's nose. Then it occurred to Finn that Brandine was sitting at the table. Only the chieftains and their heirs sat at the table proper, family members, honored guests, and normal members of the delegation sat behind the leaders in sequential order according to rank. Brandine shouldn't be at the table. Dad, Finn murmured. Don't worry, I see it. Hiccup said calmly. Does that mean Ali's not here? Finn bit back his frustration. This was the part of being chief that he would loathe, that he already loathed as heir. The politics, the secrets, the beating around the bush. He understood why he couldn't just proclaim all his thoughts and feelings and impressions to the entire room when people would use it against him, but seriously. It was beyond frustrating. He met Genevieve's eye across the table and she raised her brows in question. He shrugged and exhaled through his nose. It's go time. The gong rang a second time and silence fell. All right, let's get started, Hiccup said, nodding to a large stack of papers. Astrid took 3 and slid the pile to her right. Kara took 2 for her and Frederick, and on the pile of papers went until everyone around the table had a copy. Finn glanced down at his own even as his father continued, here you'll see the accumulated numbers of the economy for each of the tribes. For those who don't know, as allied tribes we do this to see if there are any villages who are bringing in less food or other resources, and others are able to assist should they be willing. That goes by a vote. His dad continued, even as Finn considered the numbers. Unsurprisingly Burke was toward the top of the chart, as well as Jut, Braun, the cutthroats village known as Scorch, and Rune. Finn frowned at Rune. He knew their wealth had very little to do with any honest living. He didn't give the bitter thoughts another inch and scanned the rest of the page. Berserker Island and many of the others weren't wealthy by any means, but they managed. Outcast Island remained one of the few that seemed to be struggling. He hadn't been there many times but he remembered the dark, cracked earth, dry from lack of rain and a far cry from paradise, what with its lack of vegetation and sunlight. Animals avoided the island aside from dragons. He wondered how often the other villages had to assist Outcast Island in the past. With a quick glance at Ali out of his periphery, he wondered if she'd ever lowered her pride enough to ask for help. Or if she felt she needed it. Her people weren't exactly beggared either, making their living off of metal work and trade, Johan's business likely keeping them afloat. Many people had left Outcast Island for other villages too, so they indeed had less mouths to feed, judging by the numbers on the paper. But Finn found himself wondering what exactly Outcast Island brought to the table for the other allied tribes. Other than a spit of rock to send their criminals to. Why were they even in this alliance? They had never been particularly friendly. His dad's prosthetic nudged his leg and Finn tried not to flinch. Kara was talking. The conversation had moved on while he'd been thinking. He subtly laid the paper down and refocused on the conversation. Gods, this was going to be fun. How did his dad manage all this multitasking? Conversation circled around for some time, numbers and percentages, with many calculations from Fish Legs, who monologued for at least 5 minutes about Burke's plentiful harvest, amongst other details. Finn fought to keep the boredom at bay. He wasn't alone though. A few of the chieftains, not just the younger few, also blinked a bit too slowly to be truly awake. Genevieve, however, was practically at the edge of her seat, as if she couldn't retain the information fast enough. She scanned the sheet in her hand and listened to each speaker with rapt attention. He found it comforting somehow. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but maybe just seeing her interest in economics, in seeing all the villages together, maybe he could see her at his side someday, helping him lead these meetings. While the economical talk continued, Finn scanned those gathered around the table. It helped him focus. He knew if he sat without engaging himself in some way, he'd likely fall asleep. The vast room was stuffy and he'd gotten so little sleep the night before. If he didn't focus on something he would likely fall asleep. And his parents would never let him live it down if that happened. With a glance at Genevieve, he thought with no small amount of amusement that she would probably tease him just as mercilessly. Genevieve's eyes shot up and met his gaze, as if realizing his attention for the first time. Her brows rose slightly, as if asking what. A corner of his mouth twitched and he bobbed his head ever so slightly around the table. Enjoying yourself? She fought a smile. Oh yes. The woman on his left cleared her throat subtly and Finn shifted in his seat. He glanced at her and then fought a grin. He hadn't realized he was sitting beside Millie the Frilly. She didn't hide her amusement and elbowed him gently, then winked at Genevieve across the table, who bit her lip and bowed over the paper once more, determined to pay attention. Like he should be. He exhaled slowly through his nose. This was going to be a long, long day. Millie leaned over and whispered, "We're through the worst of it." The meeting or the economics? Finn whispered back, and she breathed a laugh. Hiccup looked at him sharply but relaxed when he saw Millie and faced forward again. Finn decided he needed to buy Millie a treat from Ben the Baker's as a thank you. That was twice now she'd saved his butt. "Well, sounds like everyone is doing well," Hiccup said at last. "If any of the outer villages need any assistance at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the allied tribes." Short, sweet and to the point. Not dwelling on the fact that some villages were poorer than others. Just reminding that help was around, all one had to do was ask. And now we'll discuss some of the policies. Any particular topics that we'd like to get off our chests? Finally, something interesting, Kamikaze said. She reached inside her woolen vest and retrieved a scroll of paper. Flicking her wrist, the scroll unrolled with a loud crinkle and she cleared her throat. "I have a bone to pick with some people. Let's begin. Something seems to be off when it comes to the serious lack of female chieftains sitting around the table. I advocate that we change that as soon as conceivably possible." Finn snorted at the well-placed pun, then was instantly disgusted with himself. But his amusement dissipated when he noticed some eyes roll and frowned, but Millie quickly leaned over. She always has a list and that's always the first one she reads. It's not a bad thing, of course, but most of her requests and demands are ridiculous. Also, Millie the Frilly likes to speak during my speech and needs to go back to school where she learns that when someone else is talking, she's not supposed to be. Kamikaze said primly, staring at Millie over the paper with narrowed blue eyes. Millie merely smiled back. Kamikaze cleared her throat and continued, I also believe that the birds flying south is a bit of a distraction from the real issue, that it gets cold sooner each year, and if we don't prepare properly, we'll find ourselves with much less roast duck than the snoggletoggs of the past. A few scoffs interrupted the silence until she added, and last but not least, Hiccup insists on the limp, and even after 20 years of nagging he still won't change his ways. I humbly submit to you all that we cast a vote to change this discrepancy for the greater good, for all those that appreciate symmetry in all its forms. Kamikaze slapped down her paper and crossed her arms, staring around the table with an expectant expression. Is that all? Hiccup asked, fingers tapping against the table, the only sign of his impatience. No, Kamikaze said. When are you retiring? As you're about to be a grandfather and all, I'm ready for Finn to take over. He's actually fun. Finn felt the eyes of the room shift to him. He ignored that though, focusing on the way his dad stiffened ever so slightly at the word grandfather. Brandine's gaze sharpened. Deflect it, change the conversation. I don't think any of us are ready for that yet, Finn said, bringing the attention back to himself. He forced himself to smile at Kamikaze. Though I have to agree with you. The colder months starting sooner, the birds leaving before we're ready. What are we going to do when there's not enough roast duck to go around? Finally someone gets me. Kamikaze said, leaning forward even as many voices groaned. Some even laughed. But there's simply no way that we can stop the weather from changing. So what do you propose? Finn asked, cutting off his dad before he could speak. Simple, duck farms. Finn blinked. What do you mean? Kamikaze opened her mouth to continue, but Hiccup interrupted. Yes, thank you, Finn and Cam, for that riveting discussion. You're welcome, Finn smirked. He barely caught Genevieve's amused shake of the head. He was relieved to see that more than half of the chieftains were looking on with at least some form of amusement. Even Sorka Sandalwood's stoic expression of grief had momentarily cracked. We'll continue this later, Kamikaze hissed and leaned back in her chair. I've said my piece. Carry on. Finally. Before we proceed into any other pointless tangents, Gray the Gullfowl said, lacing his fingers. I've been waiting countless months to discuss this. I have an issue with other chieftains and their people showing up on my land without prior notice or permission. Not to mention ransacking my village. Finn wondered when this might come up. His parents stared back with level expressions. Anyone in particular you'd like to call out? Don't play dumb, Hiccup, Gray snapped. There are plenty of witnesses who saw you and your entire family, not to mention a handful of riders, terrorize our lower town. Terrorize seems like a bit of an exaggeration, Gray Hiccup said, nonplussed. Your people had plenty of chances to release my daughter's dragon before it was killed, and they wanted to play games with me. I don't tolerate people messing with my family, and that includes dragons. Why was your little brat even on my island? Gray said. No surprises there that the girl continues to get herself into trouble. She was trying to get to Bog Burglar Island and got caught in a storm, Finn interrupted. Kamikaze's expression sharpened and she sat straighter in her seat. She never intended to go to Rune. Maybe he should have kept his mouth shut, but he couldn't handle the flash of interest that had appeared on Brandine's face. Oh, don't even get me started on you, Gray hissed. After your disappearance all those years ago, I had to tolerate Hiccups rampaging through my village in search of you. I think I've had enough of you kids causing trouble in my territory. Finn checked his irritation. Gray had every right to be upset. It also didn't escape his notice how Genevieve perked in her seat at Gray's words. The breadcrumbs dropped so carelessly when she knew so little about his past. Later. He'd have to think on that later. Forcing himself to stay calm, Finn said, that's water under the bridge. There may be 10 years between events, but the point remains. Both of you left Burke and ended up on my island, which I did not ask for, and I had to clean up the mess your family left behind, as usual. At the various scoffs or nods of agreement around the table, Finn felt a flush of embarrassment, which only irritated him further. Yes, he'd gotten himself into trouble all those years ago. He never should have left Burke. But what he wouldn't give to be able to say that he didn't ask to be taken against his will, held captive, and shipped off to Mayro as a slave. If nothing bad had happened to him as a result of his brief stay on Rune, if their standards and morals weren't so low, maybe his dad wouldn't have left a smoke trail in his wake. But he couldn't say that. It would only raise more questions and problems, just to briefly satisfy his longing to justify his actions, his father's actions. It didn't matter. They'd still be angry about it, and he'd only be giving them ammunition for the rest of his life. For his future as chief of Burke. No, he needed to stay away from that route altogether. Still, he wouldn't be chastised in front of all these chieftains like a child. "Are you mad that we came to your village unannounced?" Finn asked boldly. "Or because we stopped business for a day? The dragon fights, nabbing kids off the street for the slave trade, even the local harlots had to go home for a day." Tolam II choked on his ale, even as gasps rose up from around the table. The Jatan's eyes went wide, their eyes darting to Grey, who began turning a dull shade of red. Even Hiccup flinched in surprise. "How I run my island is disgusting," Finn interrupted, cutting through the din. His dad finally looked at him with a warning in his eyes. "You want an apology? Fine, I'm sorry I came to your island unannounced when I was 8 years old. Next time I'll knock on the fancy ironclad gates that lead up to your plush mansion on the rolling hills. But I won't apologize for coming to my sister's defense when she needed help. Help that she wouldn't have needed had she just stayed put." Grey shouted. "Why is it whenever there is haddock drama the entire archipelago has to get involved?" Dragons. Kara shrugged. "We all fly on dragons. They can't keep it in their own territory." "I understand what you're saying," Grey Kara said. "But honestly, what teenager doesn't leave home in an angry rage now and then? Traversing the entire archipelago because she had a little spat with her parents is a bit extreme." "Why did she want to go to Bog?" Ali asked. "That's none of your concern," Astrid said, her voice laced with impatience. "Isn't it?" Ali asked. "If you and your family are going to traipse across all the allied tribes, the least you could do is explain the juicy details. So why did she want to go to Bog?" "That conversation," Kamikaze interjected, "would be between myself and the haddocks. You're not an advocate for Bog Burglar Island, so I suggest you shut your trap, Ali." Ali grinned a devilish smirk and merely waved a hand for them to continue. "At any rate, the damage to my people's livelihood was extensive," Grey continued, Quicksilver eyes hard on Finn and his parents. "I want compensation for the losses." Finn snorted and looked away. He found Genevieve already staring at him, her expression sober. "Not another word out of you," Grey hissed. Tearing his gaze from Genevieve, Finn said, "I don't take orders from you." "Fine, we can discuss," Hiccup began, clearly trying to pull in the reins. "You're already in enough hot water," Grey said. "If we weren't in a peace sanction, I'd call out your actions against my people as an act of war." "War? For what?" "You shot one of my men. He had my sister by the throat." "I already said I won't apologize for protecting her, and of course you wait until the peace sanction to say anything," Finn said, crossing his arms and feeling a rush of pride that probably bordered on arrogance. "You've had plenty of time to call us out. But I guess you were just too comfortable in that plush mansion. It was just too much work. Couldn't even send a message." "Enough." Grey launched to his feet. His chair went flying backward with a screech. Finn found himself grinning as Grey's men grabbed him by the arms to keep him from doing anything stupid. "Peace sanction or no, boy, I won't tolerate being mocked." "Then it seems we're at an impasse," Finn said coolly. Astrid snorted softly, clearly fighting a smile. Grey yanked his arms out of the tight hold, breathing hard as an incensed bull. He glared at Hiccup and Astrid as he reclaimed his seat, the wood snapping against the stone with the force. "Your kids are just like you. Rampaging to any piece of territory they want and causing trouble with little regard for the laws of the land. Some would call it protecting those they love," Astrid said. Grey slashed a hand through the air at her. "I don't care to be lectured about the laws of the land," Grey Hiccup said icily. "When you care so little for human life." Finn thought of the slaves he'd seen on Rune. He remembered Jarvan, still roaming free and luring in those little boys. Where were those boys now? Had they been just like him, striking out for a new life and finding the complete opposite of what they'd sought? perhaps now filled with regret and sorrow at leaving the life they'd known behind. He could feel Genevieve's eyes on him, even across the room. He couldn't look at her. Instead he turned that sorrow into something hard, something unyielding, and turned it to Gray. The man's quicksilver eyes were already on him when he said, "We all have to make a living somehow. Don't we?" The words sent a pang through his chest, but he didn't let it show. "Indeed," Hiccup said. "At any rate, I take full responsibility for my kids and their actions." "Good. Then you won't mind compensating for our losses." Astrid's fingers twitched against the table, as if resisting the desire to grab her axe, which was conveniently missing. No weapons were allowed in the Great Hall during these meetings. That way, if there were any arguments, there would be no bloodshed. Well, not from lethal weapons anyway. Plenty of people in this room could fight with their fists just as well as any weapon. "Right," Hiccup said, crossing his arms and leaning back in his chair. "If it's compensation for the lost wages of one soldier, fine, I'll pay it. But how much do you plan on compensating Jet for the 27 lives lost in the raid this past December?" Finn looked at his dad. He tried to hide his shock. What did Rune have to do with the raids? "Are you an advocate for Jet or chief of your own tribe?" Gray demanded. "Let Jet speak for themselves. This is between you and me." "Actually," Ivan said, "I find this is between all the tribes. It's not an issue between ourselves and Burke alone. Some of the men we captured were from Outcast Island as well. Who is to stop these raiders from plundering the other villages?" "Not my problem," Gray spat. "Were any of your supposed captured raiders from Rune?" "I didn't think so." "The raiders didn't need to be from Rune," Hiccup said. "Outcast Island provided plenty of those of their own accord." A flick of his green eyes to Ali, whose expression was blank and unreadable. "But Rune provided the hideout location and the means to selling anything stolen to gauge a price. With your quaint little black market well stocked with notably pricey items and some well-known friends of our own being highly knowledgeable in the trading business, of course I heard all about it." Finn blinked. "Johan. Maybe even Alton. But how would they know what items were from Jet? What exactly these raiders want from Jet remains to be seen," Hiccup continued. "But rest assured, they won't be bothering Jet again. Not now that the Jetans have ample means to protect themselves." Gray had gone very still, his silver eyes glinting. His fingers tapped against the table. Reading people wasn't his forte, but Finn had to admit that the man didn't look comfortable. "Tell me," Ivan said a bit fiercely. "What exactly did these raiders want with our wealth? Do they just hop from island to island stealing and killing as they will? Or, what was it you said? We all have to make a living somehow." "Do not toy with me," Gray hissed. "Then answer the question," Ivan shot back. "Were you aware of those people coming to attack my village? Yes or no will do." Finn realized then that he could learn a lot from Ivan. Watching Gray crack under the pressure after the dirty looks he'd been sending the Haddocks yesterday was truly a sight to behold. Gray worked his jaw for another few heartbeats before he finally said, "Yes. But I took no profit from it. If Jatan wares were sold in this supposed black market, gold and jewels can come from anywhere," Gray said. "Unless you have found a way to stamp the Jatan crest on every jewel to show which spit of land it came from." Ivan didn't reply. Gray turned his glare to Hiccup. "How did you know they were hiding on Rune?" "I have my methods," Hiccup said. His eyes darted back to Ali and their gazes locked, equally fierce. "If you have any control over these raiders, you will end it or you will." "What?" Ali simpered. "Suffer the consequences. You have no proof that any of my people had anything to do with the raids, and you know as well as I do that outcasts are very hard to control. They have no allegiance, no banner, no true homeland. As such, I have limited powers. You pawn off all your criminals to me. So forgive me if I find it a bit frustrating when you expect me to force them to act differently when you self-righteous dogmatists couldn't do it yourselves." Finn blinked. Despite himself, he had to concede that she had a valid point. It didn't stop the feeling of hatred that welled up in his chest though. 27 Jatans had died because of those raiders. At least one outcast had been involved, and he was sitting at this table, silent as the grave. He wouldn't stay quiet forever. How long until the hammer fell? How long did he have until he made his move? Hiccup smiled slightly. I'm glad to see your vocabulary is improving with your age. Biting his tongue, Finn fought the smile. His dad was enjoying this way too much. Ali smiled sweetly. Oh yes, Daddy can be quite charming. It's good to see he's making new friends. She turned her sweet smile on the Jatans, who scowled. Just be aware that Hiccup likes to preach and cram the laws down everyone else's throats, but when it comes to following them himself, he doesn't care. He'll do whatever it takes to get what he wants. Ivan breathed a laugh through his nose. Wouldn't we all, to protect those we love? That is, if you loved anyone other than yourself. Finn didn't hide the smile this time. He caught Genevieve's nervous look, but he didn't hold it for long. Ali smirked. I'm glad to see you know how to play the game. You're not as naive as you look. Kiev's jaw tightened behind Ivan, but he said nothing to defend his son. Touch my village again, Ivan said fiercely. And I'll show you just how far my naivety goes. Ali laughed and turned back to Hiccup. I like this new bunch, she said with a playful shrug of her shoulders. So testy. After everything they've been through, Hiccup said, making a note on the stack of papers before him. They have every right to be. Gray, we'll discuss the finer details of compensation later. The man gave him a terse nod. Are there any other disputes that need discussing? I wouldn't call it a dispute, Jade the Just said. But more of an inquiry. He turned to Ali and said, I'm curious. Who is this young man beside you? Are you declaring an heir at last? Oh yes, Ali sat forward and gave Brandine a sly smile. Funny you should ask. No, he is not my declared heir. The day I choose someone worthy of the title will be a day worth remembering. Ain't that the truth? Millie sighed. So who is he then? Jade asked. And why does he have the right to sit at the table amongst chieftains and heirs as if he is equal to them? Finn's heart launched into a gallop. He forced himself to not to look at his parents, to stay relaxed. As if sensing his rising panic, Hiccup's prosthetic stepped on his toes, willing him to stay silent. Like this was a part of some plan. Well, Brandine, Ali said, waving a hand. Would you like to tell them? Brandine sat forward with an air of dignity and straightened his shirt. I have a bit of an announcement for everyone. While I might be just a nobody kid from Outcast Island who's made his way through the ranks onto Chief Ali's personal guard, I won't be a nobody going forward. I have ties to Burke that will make a difference in the future. Hiccup's amused laugh was a mere puff of air. Yes, we're all aware of the endless feud between our families. Instead of being vague, perhaps you should just tell everyone who you really are. Brandine's placid smile faltered. He looked genuinely confused. I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Hiccup asked in a deadly calm voice. Finn wished he had a weapon. The tension in the room was so thick, his insides writhed. He glanced at his dad, who smiled and pulled a document out of his breast pocket. Do you know what this is? Hiccup asked. He glanced around the table. Anyone wager a guess? Why, Chief Kara said in mock surprise. That appears to be a birth certificate. Indeed it does, Hiccup said smoothly. As many of you are aware, Brandine once lived on Burke. He dated my daughter, in fact, even worked at the forge with Finn. He was under my own roof more times than I could count. He did things that I will not explain for time's sake, but if you recall, I sent out a warrant to all the allied tribes expressing that if he were to step foot on their lands, he was to be delivered to me. Brandine's gaze was level on Hiccup, even as many of the allied chieftains did a double take and blinked in realization. He didn't look worried, though perhaps a little stunned. Clearly he'd planned to be in control of the conversation. Finn, on the other hand, trembled with restraint. How his dad could say these things so casually, so calmly with such an air of control was beyond him. He clenched his jaw tighter, unwilling to let himself say a single word unless asked. No surprise is that my request was unheeded by at least one of my supposed allies. Hiccup flicked his eyes once to Ali but didn't address her. His green eyes pinned onto Brandine once again, who at least had the decency to look tense. But no matter. I'd expect nothing less than one of the closest allies of Dagur the Deranged. Why shouldn't those allies heed the call of his one and only son? For the first time ever, Finn saw Brandine's expression slip into something cold and cunning. His blue eyes narrowed slightly. All pretense of sucking up to the chieftains was gone. The whole went silent, many of the chieftains gaping at Hiccup as he straightened the document with a flick of his wrist. Brandine Anderson, son of Lofn, consort of Dagur the Deranged, born on the 20th of May, year 1090, and Dagur the Deranged, chief of Berserker Island, now rightful heir to Berserker Island. Signed and dated by the deceased chieftain himself, Lofn, who is conveniently here. Brandine tensed at that. And, big surprise, our very own Ali the Insincere and Grey the Guileful. If anyone wishes to see this. Multiple hands shot up. Hiccup instantly slid it toward Millie, who took the document with a scowl. Finn looked it over as it passed by. It was a credible legal document, signed and dated by the hairy scary librarian himself. Apparently the old man did have a name, Adolphus Doge. With a jolt, Finn remembered his dad's words the week before. How he'd said he needed to visit the library to take care of some things. Looking at his dad, he felt a strong surge of amazement. "You sly fox," Finn whispered. Hiccup smirked as if to say, "Did you really doubt me?" He turned back to the other chieftains. "It's true," Sorka said in a dumbstruck voice, reading the document now. "My father knew the horrors that man spread across the archipelago. When Dagur died, he said it was a blessing from the gods." "Not all of us would agree," Ali said in a darker tone than usual. "He wasn't a total monster." Finn looked to Brandine. He still glared at Hiccup, clearly furious that the rug had been pulled out from under him. His dad had been right. Brandine would not make both claims in one go. And he'd planned to invoke his right as father to Adriana's baby. How was he going to do that now, with all the chieftains forcing his true identity out in the open? At last, Brandine sniffed in derision. He smirked and glanced around the table at the chieftains, now staring back at him with distaste and fear. It was fear that Finn saw in some of their eyes, especially the younger chieftains. They too had grown up in fear of the tales of Dagur the Deranged. Only the Jatan's expressions remained wary. "Well played," Hiccup, Brandine said, and it was a smoother tone than the brash voice he'd come to know. "Well played." "I'll give credit where it's due," Hiccup said. This was smart and cunning, especially for Dagur. Gods know he couldn't pull off a real plan on his own. He had plans to grow the archipelago. Brandine interrupted. "Only you and your precious dragons got in the way." Toothless growled, setting many teeth on edge. "I'm sure he had many dreams of grandeur." "Quite the visionary, your father," Hiccup said. "I'm sure he taught you all sorts of important things, like lying and scheming." "Judge all you want," Brandine said, crossing his arms. "You weren't the only one fighting for a better future that day. Except his future died the instant you killed him. As mine would have if he'd killed me. Hate me all you want, but it won't bring him back, and it won't change the way things are now. Won't it?" Brandine asked. "Clearly you think I'm a threat, or you wouldn't have forced me out into the open. So, there we have it. There's my grand secret. What are you all going to do about it? I'm the deposed heir to Berserker Island with no lands of my own. My rightful throne and people rest under the command of another man." He looked at Sven, who scowled. "But you haven't once heard me complain. I'm an outcast, and I always have been. I wasn't raised a pampered little heir like some here." He flicked a look of disgust around the table. "I didn't have that luxury. My father was taken from me when I was 7. I watched his body fall from that dragon's back." He pointed at Toothless with a finger. "When you shoved him off, and I watched as he hit the rocky chasm below. I heard the crack of his bones as each one of them broke." The room was deadly silent for a heartbeat before he smiled. "I admit I don't remember much after that. But I do remember a certain woman begging the gods to let her husband live." He turned heavy-lidded eyes on Astrid, and Finn tensed, ready to jump to his mother's defense. She met his glare with one of her own. "And that's when I understood the full weight of hatred. But as I said, I haven't done anything to you people. I've lived on Outcast Island my entire life, save the last few years. Ali was my godmother of sorts, so of course she had a hand in my upbringing, but I haven't used it to my advantage more than any normal kid. Certainly not more than Finn has taken advantage of his own title as heir to Berk, what with his traipsing across the archipelago. A few grunts of agreement sounded around the table, and Finn saw how quickly Brandine dissuaded the fear and tension. How he forced them to sympathize with him, consider his side. Perhaps Hiccup was taking it too far, forcing Brandine out into the open when he was just a young man trying to make a name for himself, just as anyone else would at the ripe age of 19. After all, he hadn't done anything to the other tribes, as far as they knew. He hadn't even spoken to Sven yet in regards to his rightful title. Just like that, Finn understood. Brandine would have them all convinced that he was harmless, that he wouldn't make any trouble for Sven, for the tribes. He might even convince them that the intimacy with Adriana had been consensual. He saw it all with wide-eyed clarity. If he died, the baby would be the next heir to Burke through Adriana. And Brandine, through whatever schemes and lies he'd concoct, would still have every right to claim the baby and his rights as its father. He still had time, up to 2 weeks after the baby was born, which no doubt would happen very soon. He couldn't allow it. He wouldn't allow it. His sister would never have to endure this disgusting piece of filth for one more minute. Not if he had anything to say about it. He'd let his father play the game thus far. It was time for him to show his own hand. You say you haven't done anything to us and you talk of taking advantage, Finn said. Despite the thundering of his heart, the multitude of eyes that jumped to him in surprise, he felt calm and sure. He met Genevieve's eyes for the first time in what felt like eons. Her brows creased in concern, as if she sensed his resolution. He faced Brandine again. Then I'll point out the fact that you took advantage of my sister in the most horrible way. Hiccup's eyes flashed in warning, as if to say too soon. Brandine smiled. I wondered who was going to bring that up. For the record, it was consensual. It was rape. Finn stated. Many people gasped or murmured from the seated crowd, filled with councilmen and guards behind the heirs and chieftains. The latter knew of the accusation because of the warrant, of course, but due to the peace sanction there was nothing anyone could do. If Brandine had shown up on any loyal allies' territory outside of the peace sanction, they would have every right to arrest and hold him and deliver him to Burke. But their hands were tied by the sanction, which was likely why no one had said anything before. If Jade and Kara's roles in revealing Brandine's identity had been a part of a greater scheme with his parents though, then nearly half the chieftains around the table understood. If they could put 2 and 2 together, they knew about Adriana's baby being the potential heir to 2 tribes. If Brandine still decided to make a claim as the baby's father, it would be indisputable. Eric would have to fight Brandine to the death for the full rights as the baby's father. The only other way to fight it would be to convict Brandine with rape, and the only way they could do that was by getting around the peace sanction. Finn took a deep breath. I invoke the right of Clause 17. His parents swiveled in their chairs with looks of shock. Even Brandine blinked. For those of you who don't know, Clause 17, Finn said, past the murmurs around the hall. Invokes the right for any chieftain or heir to justly accuse and challenge a criminal during a peace sanction. It is the only exception. If there is valid proof to a heinous crime with a witness or victim declared, the accuser may challenge the accused to a duel. It is to first blood only. If the accuser wins, the accused may be arrested and held for trial during the time of the peace sanction. If the accused wins, he may go free, but the peace sanction must hold. He and Eric had spent hours upon hours searching the records in the library for a loophole to the peace sanction. There was always some loophole. It was just a matter of finding it. And when they finally discovered it, he'd read it so many times that it had nearly burned a hole through his vision. When the time came to recite it, he would not falter. Brandine stared at him with a look of shocked interest. I'm impressed, Finn. You actually know how to read. Who knew? I won't let you hurt my family anymore, Finn said, ignoring the jab. So, Brandine Anderson, son of Dager the Deranged, you stand accused. Will you fight me? Finn, don't do this, Hiccup hissed, looking positively unhinged. It's too late, Hiccup, Brandine said. The words have been said. Either I accept or I die a coward. We all die someday and you're already a coward. Will you fight me? Brandine laughed, some of that darkness lifting from his eyes. Hiccup was trembling with suppressed rage. Finn didn't meet his eyes. It was done. But the clause states there must be a witness and proof, Ali said, smirking at him. It seems you have come unprepared. You're wrong, Ali, a young woman's voice interrupted from the back of the Jatan delegation. With a gasp, Hiccup leaped to his feet as Adriana stood and pulled off the black hood of the cloak that had concealed her all this time. Eric stood at her side and also removed the black hood covering his own face. They must have been sweltering in those cloaks all this time, but hiding in plain sight, they'd heard everything. How he'd pulled it off, Finn would have to ask Eric later. Indeed, his brother-in-law knew how to make an entrance. Adriana walked around the murmuring table, Eric at her side until she stood between her parents. Finn also stood, meeting her eyes and nodding. For her, for Eric, and for their baby, he'd do this. No matter what it took. Their dad shook with such anger that she touched his arm in comfort before facing the table. It's my word against Brandine's, Adriana said. Her green eyes sparked with a fire Finn had scarcely seen before. Despite my past and unpopular opinions that have gathered as far as I am concerned, I did not ask for intimacy in my relationship with Brandine. I told him no numerous times. He forced himself on me, and this she took off her cape to reveal her swollen belly. Is all the proof you need? You're married, Ali scoffed. Eric, my love, Adriana said sweetly. When did we get married? November, Annie. Tell me, Ali, I want you to use that big brain of yours, Adriana said, and Finn nearly choked. Do I look a mere 5 months pregnant to you? You could have just as easily gotten knocked up before the wedding. As I said, it's my word against Brandine's, Adriana interrupted, wrapping her arms around her belly. The point still stands. My brother has every right to make this accusation and I fully support it. When the time comes for the trial, it will be up to the chieftains to decide his fate. When, she said. Not if. Her confidence that he would beat Brandine in the duel filled Finn with pride. Brandine smirked in amusement. Well, it seems I am outnumbered. This is not happening, Hiccup said through gritted teeth. I forbid it. There's no going back once the accusation is out, Brandine said. Peace sanctions are delicate proceedings. To pause them is no small affair, and once it's said and done, the law stipulates that it must be taken care of right away before the meetings can continue. Technically, as the accused, I hardly have the right to refuse. If I lose the duel, I have the rights to a defense, of course, but I don't get that luxury right now. The best I can do is comply. It's settled then, Finn said. No. Hiccup shouted. The arena. Finn ignored him. We have 1 hour to prepare until we fight. This will decide your fate. Brandine smirked. May the best man win. An hour. An hour to prepare for this wretched duel and get a hold of himself. It wasn't enough time. Hiccup wanted to break things. Now that the meeting was dismissed, word had traveled through the village like wildfire set by fireworms through all the allied tribes. Fearless Finn had challenged Brandine Anderson, the confirmed true heir to Berserker Island, to a duel to defend his sister's honor. Hiccup could barely hear anything past the clip of his prosthetic on the gravel, his ragged breathing. Toothless walked at his side, easily matching his pace with his long legs. He crooned in concern, but it went ignored. Hiccup couldn't think straight. He was so angry that he knew the moment he opened his mouth he'd lose it. He didn't need to look to know that his family was on his heels. He stalked to the Larson house and shoved open the door, holding it open for them. He wished his own house was closer so they'd have more privacy, but there was nothing for it. Adriana couldn't fly to the Haddock house, so there was no use dwelling on the thought. As she walked inside between Astrid and Eric, Hiccup felt a stab of ire so deep he almost snapped right there. She'd been a part of this. They'd planned this behind his back. He couldn't look at Finn as he walked in hand with Genevieve, who looked a little white in the face. Before Hiccup could slam the door, Kiev appeared. Hiccup, he said gently. I'd like to be here for this, if that is all right. Why? Because I sense that some neutral ground might be necessary. Hiccup's arms trembled, but he scrounged up enough self-control to not slam the door in the man's face. He jerked his chin and Kiev stepped inside. When the door was closed at last, Toothless guarding outside, the house went silent. Hiccup couldn't stand still. He found himself closing all the curtains to block out any spies, both innocent or voluntary. He felt their collective intake of breath as Finn broke the silence. Dad. What the hell is wrong with you? Hiccup exploded. Genevieve flinched. Kiev put a comforting hand on her shoulder. Finn took the heat of his glare. To his credit, he didn't flinch. Nor did he look sorry. He did, however, drop Genevieve's hand and put some space between them. I had to. I had everything under control. Or didn't you pick up on that when I practically shouted at you to keep your mouth shut? Do you think Brandine is going to keep his mouth shut? Finn said. The second he makes a claim for the baby, it's over. Hiccup shook his head. No, this is because I told you to back off because of the peace sanction. You just want revenge. That's not fair, Daddy, Adriana said. Not fair. Hiccup turned on her and she stiffened. I'll tell you what's not fair, that everything your mom and I have done to keep this peace treaty together will fall apart now because of this stupid duel, because that just gives them an excuse to start a war. How many innocent people will be caught in the crossfire now because you couldn't just let me handle it? You can't control everything, Eric said in an insistent voice. He would have made the claim anyway. We were basing our hopes on a bluff. A bluff that got us a lot more information than you ever anticipated. So Johan told you about the hideout on Rune, Finn started. Hiccup scoffed. Johan didn't tell me anything. But planting the idea into Gray's mind sure worked in our favor, didn't it? He told us everything we needed to know. But that's not important. The raids were just the beginning, but Brandine can't work in secret anymore now that the entire archipelago knows his secret. That's all fine and good, Finn said, and Hiccup felt hot around the collar. But it doesn't change the fact that he could still make the claim on the baby, and the only way to fight that. I know the law. Hiccup shouted, stepping up so they were nose to nose and jabbing him in the chest. I'm the one who found it. The best way to keep him from making that claim was to distract him with everyone knowing his secret, to make him re-evaluate whatever schemes he's been concocting. That was the plan. And you blew it. Next time, Finn said, his own skin beginning to flush. Maybe you should include me in all your grand schemes. Or tell me, did you not think that my genuine shock and confusion would only work better in your favor? Hiccup grit his teeth. He had thought that, actually. Or maybe, Finn continued. If you want me to be a part of these meetings and keep cramming responsibilities down my throat as the heir to Burke, he threw up his hands in mock quotes. Then let me in on your little plans. You didn't tell me you were going to the library to get his birth certificate. You could have figured it out. The words were out before he'd considered them, but he instantly cringed inside. Finn squinted. Oh, I see. I'm in the dark because I'm just not smart enough to keep up, is that it? No, Hiccup said stubbornly. Then what is it? I can't handle it. I don't know when to keep my mouth shut because I'll blow all your big and important plans. No. Then stop hiding things from me. Finn cried. If leading our people is so important, then let's work together on it. Because maybe they are not painting a target on my back, they are painting a target on yours, and if you get killed, then what? Then I'm the next in line, and chances are you'll take a wealth of knowledge to Valhalla that might have been important for me to know. And, for the record, I didn't do this out of revenge. I'd actually like to keep Eric alive, and if I'm the one who has to shed blood to protect him and Adriana, then so be it. They were both breathing hard. Hiccup had never wanted to throttle his son so badly, not since he'd been the leader of a gang that had torn their village and family apart, not since he'd nearly gotten Eric killed. Astrid pushed between them. All right, both of you breathe. Hiccup couldn't think past the pulsing, white-hot anger that continued to writhe beneath his skin. He took a step back and took a few deep breaths, trying to listen to Astrid, but he couldn't stop the next words that came out of his mouth. When did you find out about Clause 17 exactly? Finn's expression was hard like stone. Last night. Eric and I found it. And you supported this? Hiccup asked his daughter. Not at first, Adriana said, turning a hard look on Eric. He had the decency to look sheepish. He slipped out in the middle of the night and was gone for hours. When he came back, I forced him tell me what was going on. Trust me, I was furious. Not enough to stop him though. Dad, Adriana said with a resigned sigh and closed her eyes, as if praying for patience. When he explained it and we talked it over, it is the lesser of two evils. Losing Eric's life or some of Finn's blood should he lose, and I don't think he will. When he wins, then we can arrest Brandine and put this whole matter to rest. Hiccup shook his head and shoved his hands through his hair. You don't get it. Kiev cleared his throat softly. This involves more than just your family, kids. We understand, but if this goes south and starts war down the road, then countless hundreds of lives, maybe even thousands, will be lost. Is that worth it for one man? To make him disappear and leave us alone, yes. Adriana said. You once fought the entire archipelago for us, Finn said fiercely. Why do you insist on playing the peace card on this? Do you want Adriana to split the baby's citizenship? Or Eric to die? The odds were not in my favor in the duel with Dager, Hiccup said hotly, yanking his hands out of his hair. And yet he's the one who died. Eric could do it. Eric looked uneasy. I would fight if I had to, but I'd rather not. If you're so willing for someone else to fight for your family, then you don't want it enough. Eric flinched and Finn's head snapped up, aghast. Adriana blinked in shock. Dad, she said. That's not. Yes, Hiccup said, his anger sharpening with resolve. I once fought the archipelago for you too. When I was pressed into a corner with little to no allies, the law itself against me, and desperate for any sort of loophole to save my family from a terrible fate, I did whatever it took to get it done. His voice felt raw in his fury. The Sullivans blinked between them with apprehensive looks. Let them see the Dragon Master in his full fury if they insisted on being present. He didn't care. He shook his head at Eric. Was I terrified? Yes. But was it worth nearly dying for? Absolutely. It's not about preference. If someone threatens to take your child away from you, I'd like to think there's absolutely no question as to what your next move is. Eric swallowed. I know, he said gently. That's why Finn is dueling Brandine first. And if he loses and Brandine makes the claim, then I'm making the challenge. Adriana stiffened and grabbed his arm. No. We'll leave Burke, we'll go somewhere safe. You're not going anywhere, Hiccup snapped. You can't stop me, Adriana said fiercely. All of you men constantly risking your lives. And running away is the best option. Hiccup demanded. If we get to live together with our baby, isn't that the better life? Without Brandine knocking on my door. Adriana said, her voice beginning to thicken with emotion. Running is not the right choice, regardless of how I feel about it. Do you think if Brandine wants the baby enough, he's just going to let you disappear? If he takes back the Berserker Islands and becomes chief like he wants, he'll need an heir, not to mention he'll be able to pay to put a bounty on your heads. Tell me, how much do you think an heir is worth when he or she goes missing? Then we pay him off, Adriana argued. Give him lands, whatever he wants. Something tells me, Astrid said, that we could offer him the entirety of Burke and it still wouldn't be enough. Why? He could have more kids with someone else. Eric shook his head. Why would he give up something that has value to him? Value? Adriana shouted, turning angry yet tearful eyes on him. He doesn't care about the baby. Annie, not the baby itself, he'd lose his leverage over us. Finn rubbed his face. Whatever his motive and all the hypotheticals, it doesn't matter. When I win this duel, then we can put him on trial. When he's convicted, then. Stop, Hiccup said. Do you think this is going to be a walk in the park? That he's going to let you win easily? I'm not losing, Finn said, meeting his eyes. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think I could win. Hiccup shook his head. You're setting us up for failure. Ye of little faith. Finn, Astrid interrupted. What if you're wounded so badly? It's to first blood only. And what happens? Hiccup hissed. If his sword goes just a little too deep. Or what happens if yours does? War, Finn. That's what happens. You're going to declare war if I somehow die in this tiny little duel? Finn asked incredulously. Don't say that, Genevieve whispered. Finn looked at her in surprise, almost like he'd forgotten she was there. Jen, I can do this. She swallowed hard, as if she wanted to say more, but didn't. The point is keeping him from making the claim, Finn continued. A claim he'll definitely make if you die today. Who needs an assassination when you volunteer for the job? Dad, stop being so paranoid. I'm not going to die. Growling, Hiccup spun away and shoved his hands into his hair. Gods, sometimes. What? You're so stubborn and impetuous. Right back at you. Hiccup gave a mirthless laugh and dropped his hands. Trust me, I'm anything but impetuous. Stubborn then. I learned from the best. He glared and found a hard wall of iron in Finn's eyes. Suddenly, Hiccup saw his father, no nonsense and proud with an iron will of his own, staring back at him. The thought sent a pang of nostalgia and memory through his chest, dulling his anger. He considered hanging on to it, that righteous anger. He didn't like this horrible plan. So many things could go wrong. Yet they had a point. There was nothing that could be done. And if Finn won? You'd better win, he said at last. His entire countenance and tone of voice must have changed because the Sullivans' shoulders slumped. He instantly felt guilty at his savagery. I plan to, Finn said. No matter what it takes. Adriana took a deep breath and covered her face, her shoulders curving inward. Annie. Eric said, putting a hand on her shoulder. This has to work, she whispered. It has to. It will, Anna, Finn said in a soft voice that he so rarely used. But if you lose? Adriana said, her fingers curling against her cheeks. Eric gently pulled them away and pulled her into his chest. If B. Brandine makes the claim and Eric fights him and D dies, I can't, she broke into a choking sob. The last of Hiccup's anger ebbed away at the sound and he joined Astrid at their side. We're not going to let that happen, Addie. Ever. Never, Astrid said, brushing her hair back. Take some deep breaths. Eric's teal eyes were a bit distant, even as he held her close and ran a soothing hand across her back. Stress was evident in every line of his body. Instantly, Hiccup felt awful. He shouldn't have said those things to Eric. He knew exactly what sort of stress that felt like, and Eric was only 19, trying to fill shoes that he himself had done in his mid-20s. He'd had the benefit of being a husband and parent for a few years before Dager had come knocking on his door, threatening to ruin his life. Eric had been around faithfully through everything so far. Now when it was starting to get difficult, Hiccup had the nerve to insult his character. He had no right. Eric was handling things amazingly well considering he was just a kid himself. I'm sorry, Hiccup said. Eric blinked out of his thoughts, even as Adriana stifled her cries and wiped her face. The boy was so good at hiding his emotions, locking them behind a calculating mask. Perhaps he'd learned that from his own mother or even Hiccup himself. But he couldn't hide the stress and anxiety right now. I'm sorry, Hiccup said again. I shouldn't have said that to you. It wasn't right. No, Eric said hoarsely. Exhaling heavily, he met Adriana's eyes and gave her a wan smile. But you're also right. The time for comfort and preference is over. This is what I signed up for. I can't falter now. He met Hiccup's eyes and that look of terror had hardened into something unyielding. And I won't. Hiccup nodded. At any rate, Astrid said, steering Adriana into a seat. All this stress is not good for you. Genevieve launched into action and pulled mugs and a kettle out of the pantry as if she owned the place. Soon water was bubbling and she handed everyone a mug of a calming tea. Finn thanked her, but declined his mug. I need to get ready, he said. Hiccup nodded, blowing on his own tea. His mind worked quickly, knowing exactly what sort of styles Finn and Brandine fought, having watched both of them train over the last few years. He won't want to lose. He'll play dirty if he needs to. He has just as much to lose as we do. But unlike him, Finn said. Our prize is infinitely more precious. Eric twisted the leather strap of his quiver in his hands. He stood in the darkened archway of the arena where Finn would exit, his jatanbo and quiver strapped across his back. Should something go wrong, each fighter was allowed to have 1 second, someone to protect them if the duel for first blood turned, well, more bloody. He'd insisted on the position last night when they'd found Clause 17. Finn hadn't argued, whether offering him that right as husband and father of the victims or because he genuinely wanted Eric as his second, he didn't know. The hum of the crowd filled the stone archway, buzzing like a hive of bees above him. He could both hear and feel the thudding footsteps of the villagers as they found seats. Apparently there were so many villagers that it was every man, woman, and child for himself. The chieftains and their families were the only ones guaranteed front row seats. Everyone else had to fight for a good view. He glanced to the rim of the arena and found Hiccup and Astrid talking to Cora near their ordained seats. A metal bell hung on a wooden beam nearby. When Hiccup gave the word, the bell would be rung and the duel would begin. Adriana sat beside Astrid's chair, looking anxious. He was pleased to see Inga sitting around behind her, probably at Mara's order. He should be up there and she wasn't happy about his choice as second either, but she understood. Finn needed protecting too. Honestly, she shouldn't even be here. Like Astrid said, all this stress was not good for her. Watching her brother and assailant duel would not ease her anxiety. Shoving those thoughts and all temptation to overthink this situation aside, Eric focused on the arena. The sun was out with only a few clouds dotting the sky. It was near perfect weather for a duel, Finn said. Looking out across the arena with the sunlight obscuring his vision, Eric couldn't quite see into the opposing tunnel where Brandine was getting ready, just as Finn was behind him. What he wouldn't give just to fire an unsuspecting arrow across the arena and take Brandine out right now. Save himself, his family, and probably the entire archipelago the trouble. Scuffling footsteps sounded and Finn joined him. He was clad in light material he usually trained in but nothing totally grungy. Astrid insisted on choosing his outfit, even though he'd said that he could duel Brandine in his underwear and it wouldn't make any difference to him. Genevieve had gone beet red at the comment, the poor girl. Because Clause 17 was such a big deal, not to mention rare as it had only been invoked a handful of times historically, it was highly specific on the rules. It was meant to be difficult but fair. Each fighter could have one weapon, no shields, and no armor. Fists, feet, and natural elements could be used to their advantage, but the end goal must be to draw the first blood. Nevertheless, Astrid had chosen well. She'd made him put on loose-fitting trousers, a long-sleeved blue shirt and a sleeveless leather jerkin. Eric had to admit that with his calculating frown and pinched brow and sword belt, he looked quite chiefly. Stop that. Eric blinked. What? Looking at me like you're second-guessing. I'm not, Eric said, turning back to the arena. You've got this. Finn glanced at him but said nothing. Are you nervous? I'm ready to end it. All of her pain and suffering by ending him once and for all. That doesn't answer my question. Huffing, Finn adjusted the leather ties around his waist. A little. Only because my dad overthinks everything. Don't focus on that, Eric said, facing him fully. Any of it. You know how he fights, his tells, the injuries he's had. Yeah, well, Finn squinted. He knows mine, too. Then don't give him an opening. Eric crossed his arms, the reality of what was about to happen cresting like a wave in his chest. He tapped his prosthetic against the stone. You can do this. I have to, Finn said. For your sake. Eric fought the nerves that shot through his stomach at the thought of him going out there to duel Brandine but shook it off. He'd cross that bridge later should they come to it. Returning his focus to the current situation, he looked at Finn, his friend, his brother. If he goes too far, I'll be right there. Finn met his gaze. You're the best shot on the island. Don't miss. They heard running footsteps against the stone passage and Genevieve appeared, her mane of blonde curls flying, cheeks flushed. She barely dodged a weapons table in time before she slowed and met Finn halfway. As Finn caught her up in a tight embrace, Eric turned his back and faced the arena to give them a few moments of privacy, whatever that might entail. Finn would be fine, he'd make sure of it. Still, he didn't blame Genevieve for wanting to wish him luck before he crossed swords with their enemy. Genevieve clung to Finn tightly, arms around his neck. It felt like the raid all over again, except the chaos of the raid was now replaced with intentional, calculated moves, not sprung on them by surprise. The meetings had been intense and informative. There was so much Genevieve wanted to ask him, but the moment he'd invoked the right of Clause 17 and more than half the chieftains had looked like they'd fall out of their chairs, including his parents, she knew she wouldn't get that chance anytime soon. Maybe not ever. Hiccup's words pounded inside her head like a hammer striking an anvil. What if they were setting themselves up for failure? What if he was mortally wounded and died of his injuries? Hiccup would likely declare war to avenge his son's death, and their enemies would fight tooth and nail for Adriana's baby, who would be the heir to not one tribe, but two. And where would that leave her? What role would she play in the resulting mess that would take place? "You're squeezing me rather tight," Finn said, a spark of humor in his voice. He set her down gently and held her wrists. "I'd hate to suffocate before the big event." Genevieve tried to smile but knew it looked fake. When you told me at breakfast not to interfere, this is what you meant." Finn pursed his lips and pulled her closer. "Yes. Are you mad at me?" "No," Genevieve said. "No, I'm not mad at all. But I admit I'm a bit terrified." "What if?" Don't focus on the what-ifs. Just now." He was right, of course. It wasn't wise to overthink everything and work herself into a tizzy when the duel hadn't even started yet. No blood had been shed yet. Let tomorrow deal with itself. Besides, it wouldn't do to stress him out before he walked onto the playing field. She nodded and took a deep breath. "Please be safe." "I'll be fine. Brandine is the one who needs to worry." "Don't be cocky," Genevieve chided. "Like your dad said, he'll play dirty." "I can play dirty too," Finn said, toying with a stray curl at her collar and giving her a coy smile. She pinched his bicep and he flinched away with a hiss. "Now is not the time for flirting. I got you to smile, didn't I? And in front of Eric, too. Please, with all the snogging I've had to endure with him and Adriana, I'd say we're evenly matched." A pointed cough sounded from the archway, but Eric said nothing. Genevieve cleared her throat. "Well, if that's the case, then I'll save a kiss for your victorious return. And let me walk onto the battlefield without a good luck token?" Finn asked. "That's hardly fair." Rolling her eyes, Genevieve pulled him down by the collar of his jerkin. "You talk too much, Haddock." When she kissed him, he slid a hand to her neck and plunged it deep into her hair, tilting her jaw so he could kiss her more firmly. His kiss was searing and fast and claiming. As if, despite his confidence and bravado, inside he was afraid that this plan would fall through and he might not get a chance to do so again. At any rate, if he weren't about to duel his nemesis and if they didn't have thousands of people outside waiting for him, she might have let it go on. Instead, Genevieve pulled away and held him close, even as he pressed his forehead to hers. "I may not like it, fearless Finn," she whispered. "I might be afraid for you and of the future, but know this, just as you defend the helpless, I will support you. No matter what happens next." A small, happy smile appeared on his face and she wondered at the look. "That's all I need, Jenny." Before she could reply, he kissed her once more and then pulled away, as if shoving his emotions and feelings in a box and locking it tight. "Go upstairs, General, I don't want you on this level." Nodding, she didn't allow herself to dwell on more words or wishing him well. She'd said all that was needed and he was ready. She could tell by the look of icy blue steel that had entered his eyes the second he'd stepped away. Turning on her heel, she sprinted back up the stone passage and into the outer ring of the arena. She had to push and shove her way through the crowd to get through the stands. She'd learned on her way to the passage that she needed to forego the niceties and demand clearance if she wanted to see Finn before the duel started. Still, the return trek took time and she was sweating by the time she made it back to her seat. Panting, she sat beside Adriana and waved at her face. "How are they?" she asked tightly. Genevieve nodded. "Well enough." A resigned sigh sounded and then a skin of water was held out between their shoulders. Genevieve blinked and looked back to find Inga holding it out, looking less than happy to do so. "Finn won't be happy if he finds out you missed his crowning moment because you passed out." Genevieve wasn't sure what to make of the comment or the girl's backwards attempt at kindness. Perhaps this time it was merely bark instead of bite. Regardless, Genevieve took the skin and took a long drink of cool water before nodding her thanks. "Don't mention it," Inga said, holding it out to Adriana. Your turn, love. Adriana's eyes were pinned to the archway to their left, where Finn and Eric stood in the darkness, barely visible. Her hands rested on her belly, unmoving. She shouldn't be here for this, but she insisted. If her brother was going to the mat for her family, then she wouldn't be a coward and wait at home to hear the results second-hand. Even though with all the stress the day had brought already. Genevieve took Adriana's hand and squeezed it as Inga returned the skin to her satchel. At last those green eyes, equal to hiccups, met hers. He's going to be fine, Genevieve said in as firm a tone as she could muster. Adriana swallowed and said nothing. Her parents took their seats, Astrid murmuring in her ear while Hiccup raised a fist. Silence fell slowly across the arena as the vast crowd looked to him. Brandine Anderson of Outcast Island stands accused for the rape of Adriana Haddock, accused by fearless Finn Haddock by the right of Clause 17, sectioner of the Archiplagan Treaty. Here they will fight, one for the honor of his sister, the other for his life. First blood drawn by sword will declare the winner. Blood drawn by other means does not count. Seconds are only released on my command. Hiccup clenched his jaw momentarily and dropped his eyes to the arena. Fighters, take your mark. Murmuring rose up from the crowds as Finn strode into the arena. Brandine, dressed in black pants and a white shirt, emerged from the opposite side, matching his speed. Their strides were long and relaxed until at long last they reached the center, squaring off. Cheers rose up from various corners of the arena from Outcast Island and Berserker Island, likely others. The chieftains did nothing to quiet the crowd, even as Hiccup took his seat, his hands clenched on the arms of his chair. Astrid's hand dropped atop his left and squeezed it so hard, the knuckles turned white. Finn and Brandine's gazes locked. Neither of them touched their swords. But a corner of Brandine's mouth quirked in a small smile and Finn's expression hardened. Adriana inhaled sharply and Genevieve squeezed her hand tightly as Hiccup said, "Begin." The bell rang behind them with a clatter and Genevieve's stomach lurched. It was time. Asterisk as the peal of the bell clanged around the stone walls, the chatter of those gathered around the arena died away. Finn forgot the crowds, his family, Genevieve, everyone watching. A strong sense of purpose filled his veins as he took in Brandine's stance, his expression, the weapon at his side. This was it. After months of wishing for a chance to avenge his sister, the time had finally come. He wouldn't waste it. Brandine took an easy step to his right. Finn followed suit, keeping the same distance. A dance. That was half of fighting. Keeping your footing and using your head. They circled while jeers from the outcasts rose in volume, egging them on. "Do you hear that?" Brandine asked quietly, beneath the noise. "How they beg for blood. They'll have yours soon." Finn replied. "Are you so sure?" Brandine asked. They kept circling, their movements lithe but ready, waiting for the other to make a move. "Unlike our fathers, we're evenly matched." "Your father was a psycho," Finn said with a mild shrug. "That's what killed him in the end." Brandine bobbed his head to the side. "Maybe so. He was all brawn, very little brains. I got the lion's share where that's concerned." "You're worse than he was after everything you've done," Finn said. Brandine halted and he followed suit. The jeering of the crowd grew in volume, some familiar voices joining in the crowd, yelling at him to do something, to take Brandine down. He ignored them. "You saw how they still tremble at my father's name and he was unsuccessful," Brandine said in a low voice. A smile pulled at his face, stretching the scar that Adriana had given him. "Imagine yourselves in the years to come, when I bring all of you to your knees." He fingered the pommel of his sword and lowered his voice. "You especially. After all, that's where all slaves belong." Finn drew his sword. "One thing you and Dager have in common, you never shut up." "I see I've touched a nerve," Brandine said, drawing his own. "You can't handle all of this, you know. You might be willing to do whatever it takes, Finn, but you can't stop what's coming. Everything from your past and sweet Anna's is all going to catch up to you one day." "We'll stop you," Finn said, his heart pounding faster, adrenaline filling his veins. "Just like your pathetic dad and every other piece of scum we've faced." "That's where you're wrong," Brandine said. He angled his sword against Finn's and gave it a twist, a squeal of metal against metal rising in tandem with the noise of the crowd. You haven't faced anything like me. Then he struck. Finn was ready, dodging the blow to his ribs with a sharp twist and parrying the blow. Brandine pressed his advantage with deft flicks of his sword, forcing Finn to back up. Dust kicked up from their boots. Each strike of their swords sent a jolt through his hands. The sounds of the arena faded to a dull roar as all of Finn's focus narrowed on Brandine. He was fast, faster than he'd been before. He'd obviously been training and keeping up with his sword fighting. Realizing they were nearing the wall, Finn locked Brandine's sword and dug in his heels, refusing to give him another inch. Their arms shook against the force until Finn slid his sword to the side, Brandine's falling with it. Finn kicked Brandine in the chest, sending him careening backwards. He advanced, not giving Brandine much time to recover before he sent them back toward the center of the arena. Their swords flashed in the sunlight. Brandine shoved him back, panting. This should be to the death. Higher stakes makes it more interesting. And I'd love to see Hiccup cry over your dead body. He lashed out and Finn sidestepped, bringing up his sword to deflect the blow. That was his mistake. Finn didn't see Brandine's foot slip past his guard until the last second and suddenly his legs went out from under him. He landed on his back so hard his breath whooshed out his chest. Brandine shouted above him, rallying his strength and on instinct, Finn rolled. Sparks flew as the sword swept the stone right where he'd been. Shaking the hair out of his eyes, he barely managed to deflect Brandine's sword again. He had to get off the ground or he was done. On your feet, on your feet. Someone familiar shouted from the crowd. Gobber. Finn slashed at Brandine's ankles. He leaped back a few paces and Finn clambered to his feet. They stared each other down, each trying to catch his breath and looking for an opening. Amateur mistakes, Brandine said. All bark and no bite. Like someone else I know. He smirked up at the stands, right at Adriana. I guess it runs in the family. A white-hot rush of anger flooded Finn's veins at the mocking look he sent Adriana's way. Without another thought, he charged. Brandine tried to dodge but Finn cut him off with a slash, nearly cutting Brandine's arm. He met Finn's strikes with gritted teeth, holding his ground. With a squeal, Finn's sword sliced across Brandine's. He twisted to avoid losing a hand and didn't see Finn's fist until it collided with his face. A snap echoed across the arena and Brandine recoiled, his nose gushing blood. Cheers echoed around the arena. Pain shot through Finn's hand even as a rush of pleasure flushed through him. How long he'd wanted to do that. Brandine swiped his face with his sleeve and gave Finn a bloody smile. Now he was mad. Good. Finn wanted this to be dirty and painful. A busted nose was the least bit of pain he deserved. But he remembered the day Brandine and Eric had fought in the Great Hall. Brandine could keep a leash on his temper until he was hit. That's when he snapped. Just as Eric had predicted, Brandine's next strikes were faster than before. His sword shot beneath Finn's guard and he dropped to a knee to avoid the hit, slamming his sword up between them. Brandine kicked him in the chest and sent him flying backwards. The momentum sent him into a roll and he came up crouching. Brandine brought down his sword and Finn's shot out of his hands. It slid away with a clang and gasps rang through the arena. Finn grabbed Brandine's sword arm before he could bring it down again and lunged to hit him in the stomach, but Brandine blocked it and grabbed his wrist. Their arms shook with the force. Shouts rang through the arena, cheering and goading. Finn glared into Brandine's scarred, bloody face. He twisted Brandine's wrist just as he'd done with Kale months ago and Brandine hissed, dropping his sword and twisting his arm before it broke. I'll break every bone in your body when this is over, Finn growled. Brandine's knee shot up and nailed him in the stomach. Finn staggered, unable to protect his middle. Then Brandine lunged forward. Their foreheads collided and Finn saw stars, his grip on Brandine's arm loosening. He shook off the daze as Brandine pulled his arm into a tight lock and snatched his arm away. There was a sound of metal sliding out of leather and then a flash of silver. Finn lurched back as a hidden dagger sliced toward his face. Hey! One weapon per fighter. That's not fair. Finn blocked out people's shouts as he struggled to get out of Brandine's hold and keep the dagger away, but Brandine drove his knee up into Finn's stomach again. His old wound flared, another hit and he'd go down in writhing pain like he did with Donna. Brandine kicked his knee and he barked in pain as it nearly crumpled. People were full out shouting in rage now at the unfair advantage. Finn wished they'd shut up, they were only distracting him. Brandine seemed to know it too and grinned, blood still dripping down his face. Releasing Brandine's free arm, Finn grabbed the other wielding the dagger and pulled it back as far as he could. The blade was angled toward his throat, their arms shaking from the opposing force. If he slipped. With a lunge, Brandine grabbed a handful of hair and yanked his head back, exposing his throat to the blade. Finn gasped, but his strength didn't fail, even as his heart rate spiked. The dagger barely dipped. It wasn't very long, only 5 inches or so, but it was wide. One stab was all it would take. His dad was right. Brandine would do whatever it took to win. And if Finn died, they were all screwed. "Come on," Finn Astrid shouted. "Use your head." Finn panted, trying to think. If his parents weren't stopping the duel, then they knew he could get out of this. His arms wouldn't hold much longer. He glanced down and saw Brandine's exposed forearm. Fine, if Brandine could cheat, then he'd play dirty too. He didn't hesitate to lean down and bite as hard as he could. Brandine shouted and jerked away on instinct, even as the tang of blood filled Finn's mouth. He distantly heard the clang of metal on stone before Brandine tore his arm away. But he didn't see Brandine's other fist swing to the exposed side of his face. Sparks shot through Finn's vision. He felt disconnected from his body as he hit the stone floor and sounds resonated around him. His vision quaked, but he knew he needed to move. He struggled to his hands and knees and saw his sword lying a few feet away. A hard force collided into his stomach and he flew onto his back with a gasp. Pain shot through his body just as sound returned, his brain catching up at last. Brandine stood over him with a look of rage, blood pouring down his left hand. He'd retrieved his sword too and was gripping it tightly. In the haze, Finn briefly thought that Brandine looked a bit crazy. Finn forced his body to obey, sluggish as it was. He crawled back as Brandine advanced and grabbed his sword. Everything in his vision quaked and he felt a bit unsteady, but he got back to his feet. Dimly he realized the taste of iron in his mouth, Brandine's blood, and spat it out to the side before wiping his face and raising his sword. Brandine smirked and rushed forward, dragging his sword against the stone. Sparks shot up at the grating sound. Finn held his ground. No more running. No more games. Sword to sword, man to man, air to air. No matter what it took to win. XXX. Hiccup gritted his teeth as Finn was driven back toward the center of the arena. Astrid's hand was clutching his arm so tightly he'd lost feeling in his fingers, but he didn't dare look away. Watching Brandine fight, there was no doubt in his mind that he was Dager's son. For months he'd hoped and prayed and wished it weren't true, but there it was in plain sight, right in front of him. The style, the smirk, the blood. He would never doubt again. Somehow Finn blocked every swipe, slash and calculated move. Despite being clobbered over the head and looking for a moment like he'd fall unconscious, somehow he kept his footing. In fact, he seemed to fight more ferociously. Hiccup didn't know how that was possible with every injury he'd taken in a matter of minutes. Then again, Brandine had also been wounded. He was favoring his right arm due to the nasty bite wound. People had been screaming at him to call foul, to throw a second weapon into the arena for Finn, to call in the seconds, to do something, but he didn't want to distract his son. It wasn't the first time the outcasts had cheated in a duel, and it surely wouldn't be the last. Finn could handle himself. He continued to meet Brandine strike for strike. How long would this duel last before blood rained? With a savage growl, Brandine swiped his sword in an arc and Finn ducked, narrowly missing. Hiccup started. Why hadn't he just blocked it? But Finn jumped into Brandine's space and aimed his sword at Brandine's exposed waist. In his bloodlust, he'd gotten sloppy. Brandine barely leaped back in time and Finn's face darkened in frustration before he pressed the advantage. As he backed away, dodging and blocking Finn's strikes, his expression tightened as if realizing that Finn might very well win. Then something happened Hiccup never forgot. A small beam of light shot into the arena, so bright as it danced across the arena floor. Its location was indiscernible, but then it danced up Finn's body and then landed in his eyes. With a gasp, Finn recoiled. Without hesitation Brandine shot forward and his sword slashed up Finn's collarbone and up his neck toward his ear. Adriana and Genevieve screamed. Seconds. Hiccup screamed above the arena and launching to his feet. Brandine's sword sailed towards Finn's exposed chest in an unchecked swing. Finn didn't see it coming. Too late, there was nothing they could do. No. Astrid screamed. With a clang, an arrow ricocheted off Brandine's sword and he was thrown off balance. Finn collapsed in a heap, instinctively clapping a hand to his neck and gasping. Brandine whipped around with a savage glare as Eric stormed toward them, another arrow knocked. Back off! Eric shouted. The arena was torn between hysterics and dumbfounded silence. Hiccup thought his heart would pound out of his chest. Astrid was trembling at his side, hands gripping the bars as she slid into a crouch. Brandine hissed at Eric, even as his own second sprinted toward them. You're next, Larson. Eric tightened the hold on his arrow and lifted it slightly. Back off, or I'll shoot you right between your goddamned eyes. Hiccup blinked at the savagery in Eric's tone. But to his shock, Brandine seemed to pause, as if forcing himself to think past the haze. Realizing he'd get nowhere if he was dead. Like a mask, the rage slipped away and was replaced by that cold, cool amusement. Brandine raised his hands in surrender and stepped away from Finn. 3, 4, 5 paces. All right, Larson, Brandine said. Slowly he sheathed his sword. He jerked his chin to his own second, a burly man who trudged back into the stone archway looking disappointed. Brandine smirked at Finn, still gasping on the ground. Looks like I'm free to go. Then he turned and looked up at Hiccup, still standing at the bars. He smirked broadly and then followed his crony back into the archway. Eric lowered his bow and sprinted to Finn, who growled and tried to get to his feet. No, 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 he said, barely heard over the shouting of the crowds. He pressed a hand to Finn's neck and winced. Stay down. It's over. He turned a look over his shoulder and met Hiccup's eyes. Hiccup took a deep breath and fought the tremor in his hands. He couldn't fall to pieces. Brandine had won the duel somehow. That little flash of light. A spike of rage rose up in his chest so fast he nearly choked on it. He must have made some sound of anger because Astrid looked up at him and stood. Hiccup. He cheated, he said in a hoarse voice. Twice. I know. They watched as Mara sprinted into the arena and surveyed Finn's condition. Their conversation couldn't be heard over the crowd now. Too many people were shouting angrily. Not least of which, Hiccup realized, were Jatans. No honor in battle. Kiev was saying down the line, his face red beneath his blonde beard. Indeed, Hiccup wasn't sure he'd ever seen the man so irate before. No respect. Genevieve said nothing. She stayed at Adriana's side, still gripping her hand. Both of their faces were deathly pale. Addie, Hiccup said, stepping in her line of sight and touching her shoulder. She flinched and Hiccup sat in Astrid's vacated seat. Baby, are you okay? She trembled and her mouth worked for some time before anything came out. I can't. Brandine just. Finn almost. Eric stopped it, Hiccup said, resting his hands on her face. Listen to me, Addie. Her eyes focused on his. Eric stopped it. He's fine. He's not, Adriana whispered. There's so much blood. Indeed, Hiccup glanced over his shoulder and found Eric and Mara's hands both covered in blood beyond the few rags she'd brought with her. I'm going down there, Astrid said, sprinting away. People jumped out of her way, understanding her haste. He needed to go too. Take some deep breaths, find some water, Hiccup said. I need to get down there. Jen, I hate to ask. I'll stay with her, Genevieve said immediately. Perhaps she was grateful for the task until she was also ready to go downstairs. Don't worry. Hiccup nodded and met the eyes of Snotlout nearby. He nodded back, vowing silently to keep an eye on them while he checked on Finn. He pecked Adriana's forehead and then left the upper level. It took a long time to get to the bottom levels, what with all the questions and demands people kept throwing at him on his way. Eventually Toothless had roared at them and finally the crowd split, allowing them to pass. Hiccup charged a few of his men to guard the stone tunnel into the bottom level so they wouldn't be disturbed. When they arrived, Eric had Finn's arm around his shoulder as he carefully brought him into the tunnel. Mara stood over them as they walked, pressing white cloths to the wound. Blood had seeped into his entire shirt, the leather jerkin covered in it. The sight made Hiccup pause. Now he and his son would have wounds to match from Anderson men. Lucky it didn't go any deeper, Mara was saying to Astrid, who helped ease Finn into a chair. There are areas of the body that are more vital, containing more blood. There's one in the neck. Sever that. Mara, please, Astrid said, noticing the way Eric's face had blanched. Too much information. She brushed the blood off of her son's face with another rag. Hiccup shook out of his trance and walked in just as Finn jerked away from their prying hands. Not in pain but anger. I had him. He shouted, shoving the nearest box of weapons onto the ground with a crash. Toothless yelped in surprise and jumped back. Stop moving. Mara demanded as fresh blood flowed from the wound. Seeing it up close, Hiccup hissed. It was a clean, 5-inch slice from his collarbone to his neck. Hey, Astrid said, grabbing his face and forcing him to hold still as Mara pressed the rag to it again. Relax. He can't relax, Astrid, Hiccup said. He's pumped full of adrenaline, and Inga sprinted in behind him with a handful of clean rags and a bag slung over her arm. Hiccup stepped out of the way so she could help Mara. He's got every right. I know that, Hiccup, but if he doesn't hold still he's going to hurt himself more. Astrid said, then frowned. Why is he blinking so much? Inga, Mara said. The girl took her place at his neck so she could look him in the face. Finn, follow my finger. Hey, eyes on me. She dropped her hand and pinched his chin. In his frustration, it seemed that he'd been ignoring her. But no, he shook out of her grip with a wince and hissed at the pain in his neck. Perhaps a mild concussion, Mara said. We'll need to keep an eye on him. No pun intended, Inga said mildly. Finn huffed. No puns. They chuckled and Mara added, emphasis on mild, if he's able to argue with that. I'm not deaf, you know, Finn groaned. Footsteps sounded in the archway and Hiccup spun around to tell off whoever had snuck past the guards. But he froze when he saw Genevieve and Adriana walking in, hand in hand. Annie. Eric said. His prosthetic was the only sound as he met them in the archway, his hands mostly clean from what water and rags they could spare. What are you doing down here? I want to see Finn, she said in a low voice. But. Adriana frowned at him and released Genevieve's hand. She walked to the table in slow, seemingly stiff movements, a hand on her belly, and stopped beside Inga. Finn blinked and it seemed to take a moment for him to register that it was no longer Mara peering into his face. Instantly his irritation melted away though and his shoulders slumped. Anna. I failed you. No. Adriana squeaked, grabbing the sides of his face. No, not at all, Finn. You did everything you could. He cheated, as we knew he probably would. That's not your fault. And I just, her voice hitched in her throat and she lunged forward to hug him suddenly. Inga gave a shrill cry as Finn gasped in pain. Hey, lay off the injury, girl. I'm just so glad you're not dead. Adriana said in a shrill voice. Finn patted her on the back before gently pulling her away. He looked a little white in the face with pain, but he gave her a small smile. He won't get rid of me that easily. If he had to cheat to win, then we all know I would have won. Which is exactly why he cheated. Astrid muttered darkly. Eric eased Adriana into a chair and she pressed her face into his waist. He held her close, running a hand through her hair. Inga pressed a new set of cloths to the wound and Finn clenched his jaw. Genevieve stepped up to the table and Inga huffed. Do you mind backing off until he's stitched up? Genevieve's dark eyes flashed. Do you mind staying silent for more than a few seconds, or must we endure your bad attitude all day? Hiccup blinked in shock while Eric choked. Even Adriana's eyebrows shot into her hairline. Ignoring Inga's reddening face, Genevieve pushed past her and kissed Finn's cheek. You gave me a heart attack. He gave her a weak smile. Hiccup sighed heavily, taking in his slightly bedraggled family. Guys, I'm ready for a vacation. They chuckled awkwardly and Mara murmured something like "take me with you" as she prepared her medical supplies to clean Finn's wound. Astrid shook her head. "We haven't had a vacation yet, so I don't know why." Adriana gasped sharply, flattening a hand against her belly. Eric looked at her with wide eyes. "Annie." "Oh dear," Mara said, forgetting her kit and marching to Adriana's side. "Adriana, was that the first?" "No," she said instantly. I thought it was nothing." Hiccup's heart lurched in his chest. "Wait. No. Not now." "Yes, Hiccup," now Mara said, a new tone rising in her voice. "How far apart are the pains? How long has it been going on?" "Not long," Adriana said, eyes wide. I don't know, an hour or so." "Annie!" Eric exclaimed, eyes wide. "I thought it was nothing." Adriana said, staring up at them with wide eyes. "Oh no," Astrid breathed. "What?" Finn demanded. Hiccup thought his heart was going to burst out of his chest as Mara looked straight at him and said, "The contractions have started." Chapter 45, Sunrise. Chapter text. Adriana felt the blood drain from her face. She knew she must look terrified, and judging by the fact that her terror was mirrored on all the faces around her, she knew she wasn't alone in this. She really had thought those pains were nothing. For weeks now, she would feel twinges of pressure or even tiny shoots of pain in her belly, but she didn't think much about it because Mara had told her they were common and would go away on their own. This pain, however, had been very sharp. It wasn't unlike her monthly pains, though those usually dulled with tea and a nap. The idea of trying to drink tea and take a nap to alleviate this felt morbidly funny to her. "Okay," Eric said, recovering from the shock first, "we have to get Annie to Hiccup and Astrid's." "Yes. Her mom and dad's. They had planned on it if this happened. It was far enough away that no one would pass by and hear whatever was going on, and given what she'd overheard at the healers in the past, she had a horrible feeling her baby wouldn't be the only one crying before this was over." "Right," Hiccup said. "Addie, are you okay to walk there?" Adriana had to grip a nearby table to stand up from where she was sitting, but she managed it without help. "We should go," she said with much more determination than she felt. Wait a minute!" Finn exclaimed, trying and failing to stand up thanks to Inga and Genevieve grabbing his arms. "Can't you stop it? We can't have her," he lowered his voice, "we can't have her give birth while Brandine is here, not after this. Demand a rematch, I can fight again when I'm—" "Absolutely not!" Genevieve chided, her face still white with terror. "Look at what he almost did to you." "I agree," Mara said. "There will be no more fights today. Genevieve is right, you could have been killed out there. You need rest and bandaging. You will stay at my house tonight, Finn, no arguments." She had to raise her voice on the last part, because Finn, of course, had opened his mouth to argue. "You need rest and you need your wound monitored. Inga will stay behind to do that." "Can I trust you to do that, Inga?" Inga looked a bit surprised to be addressed, but she nodded. "Of course, I will. Forget about me, my sister's about to have a baby." Finn tried and failed to stand again. "You need to stop this because if we let it continue—" Mara let out a mirthless laugh. "Stop it. Finn, use your head. She's already almost 2 weeks past her due date." "No, listen," she raised her voice over Finn's objections again. "Nothing is going to happen to her. I'll make sure of it." Hiccup nodded. "I've got guards at the house already, and several people on the council have already agreed to guard it all night if they have to. Addie's not going anywhere. And Brandine's not getting anywhere near her." He looked at Adriana, his expression softening. "I promise." Finn growled in frustration. "And you expect me to sit at Mara's and wait for news on that?" Adriana's eyebrows shot up. She'd never considered that Finn might want to be there for the birth. Mara sighed, looking between Finn and Adriana with an expression of mingled amusement and defeat. Adriana had to admit that the Haddocks weren't very easy patients. "Labor takes a very long time, Finn," Mara said. "And it depends on what Adriana is comfortable with." All eyes turned to Adriana, which made her feel incredibly awkward. She and Finn looked at each other. "He can stay in the house. I mean, I wouldn't mind. Not in the room, but the house, if he's up to it. She turned to Hiccup. You should go to the meeting. It's starting soon, and with Finn out for the count, people are going to guess. Brandine's going to guess. Hiccup tightened his jaw and looked like he wanted to argue, but Adriana knew this was the wisest course of action, and so did he. I will be there as fast as I can, okay? He stepped forward and hugged her. And if anything happens, I want you to send someone to get me. Forget the council, if you need me for any reason, I'll be there. I know you will. Adriana suddenly felt the urge to cry but overcame it. The truth was, she was terrified, and Hiccup always made her feel a lot less frightened. But so did Eric, and he was going to be there every step of the way. Now go, before you change your mind. Hiccup smiled, swiped the single tear that had escaped her eye with his thumb, and kissed her forehead. Then he left the arena without another word. Eric's arm was around her shoulders the second he was gone. We should go now. Before it gets any worse. A sharp wave of pain hit her and Adriana gasped. Agreed. She squeezed her brother's hand briefly and told him to rest before Eric and Mara led her from the room. Astrid led them through the tunnel and took a sharp right turn, away from the crowds. There's a shortcut to our house, she said quietly, nodding at the few stragglers who saw them walking. We should be there in a few minutes. I can make it. Adriana said, squeezing Eric's hand. At least, she hoped she would. At any rate, walking is good, Mara said. This could be beneficial. Adriana's heart lurched in her chest in fear, but she pushed it away. One step at a time. She wouldn't fall to pieces. Not yet anyway. She glanced at Eric, who gave her a small, tense smile. At least she wasn't the only one who looked a bit terrified. It took a long time to get to the house, and by the time they did, Adriana wasn't in a good mood. A bit of time passed between each pain, but the last few had been so sharp, she'd had to stop. Eric had held her hand, but as soon as it passed, Mara would urge them onward. Adriana forced herself to be patient. The last thing she wanted was to have this baby in the woods. It would not become a habit for the Haddocks to have their children outside. Adriana snorted and Eric gave her a bemused look. What? Oh, I just hope we get there soon, she said. Or else I'll be having this baby open to the elements. It's not a pleasant experience, Astrid said, taking her hand. I won't let that happen. It seemed to take forever, but they finally arrived at her parents' house. It smelled like it always did, like homemade scones, coffee and the sharp tang of oil from her dad's tinkering. As soon as the door closed, they helped her upstairs to her parents' room. Astrid retrieved a large bag of goods from Cliff's closet, her old closet, and helped her change into more comfortable clothes while Mara talked to Eric in the hallway. Adriana heard snatches of the conversation like long process and keeping calm. Astrid pulled back her hair and pulled into a high bun so that it wouldn't be in her face, when another pain hit her, sharper and stronger than before. Ow! Ow! Adriana gasped, clutching her belly. Breathe through it, Astrid said, holding her shoulders. Adriana, breathe. Mara swept in, Eric on her heels. His face was white with fear. The expression made her smile, even while the pain lingered. What's so funny now? Astrid asked. Nothing, she said. I just can't believe this is actually happening. Let's get comfortable. Mara said, easing her onto the bed and grabbing a bag. It will be some time before, well, before it's time, but I need to check your progress. Eric, why don't you get some rags and water from downstairs? Eric nodded a bit shakily and disappeared. Adriana blinked after him. He's understandably a bit shaken up, Mara said, patting her arm. He handled everything at the arena better, not that I'm saying he's doing a poor job right now. Now lie back for me. Adriana gulped and complied, forcing herself to remain calm. Everything would be fine. Women had been having children for thousands of years. Granted, it wasn't exactly a guaranteed safe thing to do. Or a pleasant experience. Tears burned in her eyes and she forced herself to take a long breath. Her mom met her eyes and tsked, taking her hand. Oh, Astrid said, brushing her tears away. It's going to be alright. I promise. I'm so scared, she whispered. I'm not ready. Did I ever tell you, Astrid said, about how terrified I was? Well, you were kidnapped and had to give birth on a random island with no healer. Yes, but that's not what I mean, Astrid said, sitting beside her and holding her arm to her chest. We were newlyweds when I got pregnant. I didn't think I was ready to be a mom. And then after everything happened with Dager and being in such a terrible place to give birth, trust me, I was terrified. When all was said and done, I didn't feel prepared at all either. But when I saw Finn for the first time, she laughed and shook her head. And then a few minutes later you came along. Well, I wanted to kill your dad for one. Adriana laughed, brushing the remaining tears away. Please don't let it be twins. You were so small, I had no idea. But considering the near constant argument we always had about if it was a boy or a girl, all things worked out just the way they were meant to. Astrid beamed. She bent and kissed her forehead. Everything will be okay. Encouraged, Adriana nodded. She glanced at the door. Eric. He'll be back, she promised. I think he just needed a minute. Mara stood and patted her knee. All right, my sweet, it's not as far along as I expected. That means that we're going to be here for a while. Adriana sighed. Perhaps, Mara said. But perhaps not. We'll just have to keep an eye on things. Adriana swallowed but nodded, feeling less afraid than she was a few minutes ago. She trusted Mara and her mom. Now if only Eric would return. She wanted to talk to him before she was in so much pain that she couldn't think straight. As if on cue, another wave of pain hit her and she hissed through her teeth. Astrid squeezed her arm and stood. I'm going to see where that husband of yours went off to. Yes please, Adriana said. That would be good. Astrid turned from the room and disappeared down the stairs. Adriana covered her eyes with an arm while Mara bustled around the room. She tried not to think about how the next few hours were going to go, but it was inevitable as the pains kept coming and going in shorter increments. Eric braced his hands against the countertop and tried to control his breathing. He hadn't been able to stop the shaking in his hands when Mara had given him the remain calm speech. After everything that had happened today, his wife going into labor was the last thing he wanted. Finn's invoking the right of Clause 17 had been a stressful ordeal. He'd hated sitting silent in the Great Hall but had agreed with his brother-in-law that it was for the best. He and Adriana would reveal themselves when the time came. She hadn't wasted the opportunity, using it to her advantage. She'd handled it much better than he'd expected her to actually. Then the duel. His stomach twisted, remembering the ferocity of the fight and the blood that was spilled on both young men before Finn was savagely injured. Of course Brandine had cheated. He'd probably hired some obscure individual to intervene should it look like the worst would happen. Eric had barely managed to fire that arrow in time. Finn had almost died. And now, Adriana could die. He clenched his jaw and took a shaky breath. He needed to get a grip. Still, nearly losing Finn and clotting the blood from the wound on his neck with nothing but his bare hands brought up terrible memories. Memories of when he'd been the one lying on the ground mortally wounded. And now he needed to wait for their baby to be born, and the best he could do was hope and pray to all the gods that Adriana would be fine. With a jolt of fear, he wondered what would happen if Adriana died in childbirth. As her husband, he had the rights to her child, right? Could he still fight Brandine for the baby if he made the claim? What would happen to Adriana's baby if he then died in the duel? Eric shoved his hands into his hair as boots pounded on the stairs, interrupting the silence. There was a series of quick steps and then hands were on his shoulders. Eric, Astrid said. She's going to be fine. We don't know that, he said hoarsely, dropping his hands. His hair was probably sticking up in odd directions, but he didn't care. Not when he felt the need to pace. Nobody can make that promise. Yes, there is danger in childbirth, Astrid said in a level tone. But we have the best healer helping her. She has us, and Adri's strong. We can do this. Eric shook his head and looked away, ashamed at the burn of tears in his eyes. I can't lose her, Astrid. After everything we've been through, I couldn't bear it. He swallowed and met her eyes again. And we almost lost Finn today. After all this, Brandine could still make the claim, and then what do? We deal with it when the time comes, Astrid said. If the time comes. Gods, I wish this week would be over. If we can get through this week and keep everyone alive and together, then everything will be fine. Astrid wrapped her arms around him and pulled him into a tight hug. It took all his willpower not to fall to pieces right there, even as he hugged her back. Everything will be fine, Eric. She pulled back and pressed her hands to his face. I know it's scary and I know you're worried about Finn. He'll be fine. He's strong and has more than enough willpower to remain on this earth for a little while longer. Eric huffed a laugh and rubbed his face. You're right. Plus he's got Genevieve. Right. But Adri needs you now. Push everything to the side, Brand.